Chapter 1. "We shouldn't be here," Myra groaned as we crouched lower under the bush just outside the soldier's eyesight. "Shh," I hissed under my breath and shot her a glare before turning my gaze back on the small squadron jogging past. They were the border patrol, and with how heightened and trained their senses were, I was surprised they hadn't caught us. "Do you want to see him or not?" I grumbled when the patrol was far enough out of hearing range. "Yes, but not at this risk. This is the only way, Myra. It's not like he's going to pay a peaceful visit to the village anytime soon." I could feel her nervous, crouched figure shuffling behind me, but I tried not to take my attention too far away from our situation. I could lie to her all I wanted, but there was no hiding the truth for myself. This was a bad idea, and we were too far into his territory to turn and make a run for it now. It was almost midday, and we would have to wait at least 6 more hours until nightfall. That was the only chance we had at making it back down the mountain without getting caught. "We shouldn't have done this," she groaned as I slowly rose from my crouched position behind the leafy bush, the heavy skirts of my dress catching on the sharp twigs. Perhaps I should have stolen some of Lennox's pants for this little adventure. I glanced carefully over the leafy bush that had provided our much-needed hiding spot, and could just barely make out the tops of his castle over the treetops. "Maybe we should just head back, Emily." The grip Myra had on my sleeve tightened, but I ignored the frightened and stressed tone in her voice. She was right, but that didn't mean I wanted to leave. "We are so close. I can see his castle," I whispered in something close to awe, as I double-checked the tiny dirt path before crawling out from under the bush. Myra reluctantly followed behind me. "We'll head back as soon as the sun sets. I promise." I gave her a small smile that she tried to return, but I could see the fear and worry in her eyes. I did not doubt that the rumors circling around the King of the West were true, and none of them were pleasant. I honestly didn't know what drove me to suggest our little adventure up the mountain and into his territory. I really didn't. The stories of what he did to simple travelers who stumbled across his land were horrifying enough. I didn't want to think about what he would do to us. "He'll eat us alive, Em!" Myra's tone trembled as she voiced the very thing I was thinking, but hearing it out loud just made me laugh. Out in the air, that idea sounded ridiculous. Not even wolfborns could do that, right? "Yes, and he'll also make soup with our blood and liver." I snickered at the horrified look that crossed her face and shook my head. She was too easy sometimes. But even I was beyond nervous. The King of the West. That's what they called him. No one knew his true name, but his title alone was enough to make most shiver. Even me, though I tried to hide that fact from the trembling girl a few feet behind me. The king and a few of his soldiers had visited the lower kingdom a few months ago, and word of his awe-inspiring beauty had reached even the darkest corners of the far west that made up our home. This little trip wasn't an attempt to meet him, or even fawn over him like many of the southern women were said to have done. Oh no, that would definitely lead to our death. We just wanted a glimpse of him. One teeny, tiny little glimpse of that otherworldly beauty the villagers and townspeople seemed consumed by. But no one was ever dumb enough to venture into his castle, much less his territory, to find out, except, for me. And I dragged poor, dear, sweet Mara along with me. I wouldn't let her fool me, though. I knew she wanted to see him, too. I just could not get that rambling nagging out of my head. One look, just one look. It repeated over and over again in my mind like a dark mantra until it was the only thought taking over my subconscious. I needed to see him, even if it was only one quick glimpse. That should have been enough to satisfy the persistent voice pounding away in my skull. Mara's death grip held on to the long lapel of my rather thin cloak as her frightened hazel eyes glanced frantically around the forest. I tried to shake off that same fear coursing through her gaze as it crept slowly into my chest. Just one look, just one. The small squad of soldiers was nowhere in sight, and I let the soft sounds of the forest slowly calm my racing nerves. I was never one to do something so dangerous. Usually, Mare and I were in the same boat when it came to keeping our noses out of trouble, but I could not stop this desire inside of me. The tall, overhanging trees made a dark canopy of green that let little light through. It was only because of the thin strands sparkling on the ground that we could tell it was still daytime. The snow softly gleamed under those thin streams, and I marveled at the crystallized beauty of it. I loved the snow, the cold, the northern kingdom. It was my home, where I was born, where I was raised. The mountain called to me more than any place ever had before. My heart ached every time we took a trip to the lower kingdom. There was no cold bear, and it never snowed. Mara's cloak was thicker than mine, and I could feel it brush against me every time a little woodland creature made a noise and she took a step closer. I kept my back straight and my breathing even. I had to be brave for both of us. After all, it was my stupid idea to come here in the first place. Her grip on me tightened as the trees around us began to thin, and the snow under our feet grew deeper. We were reaching the edge of the forest, and the entrance to his village. The king of the West might have been our king on paper, but he hardly ever left the village surrounding his castle, and he more or less left the other towns to fend for themselves. He cared for no one and nothing apart from his people, the Wolfborn. I was surprised to find no walls surrounding the kingdom, and even more surprised when we spotted only a few guards sulking around the outskirts. As far as we could tell, the few houses near the entrance were empty, and besides the occasional guard, there appeared to be no one near. "Is it supposed to be this empty?" Mayra asked softly from behind me as we crouched low behind a shrub near the edge of the forest. "I don't think so," I whispered back as a guard walked past the entrance before disappearing around a corner. "Maybe there's something going on in their square. Let's go find out." I didn't give her a second to register what I said before I shot out of the shelter of trees and headed straight for the village entrance. Mayra stumbled quickly after me. "Emily, wait!" she hissed at me as I quickly jumped around the side of a house with her tumbling on top of me just in time to avoid the guard walking by. "What the hell, Emily? Give me some warning next time." I gave her a sheepish smile as she brushed the snow off the front of her thick dress. "Sorry, Mayra." She ignored my weak apology but shot me a scowl anyway as I shimmied around the back of the house. I peeked around the corner of the cold stone structure to make sure the guard had passed before quickly sneaking my way to the next one. They were all squished together with very thin strips of ground separating the tiny shacks, just big enough for her and me to squeeze through. I didn't know what I was expecting, really. It was just like any other village, except for the wall. Maybe I was hoping the rumors would be true and that there were wolf dens and wolves themselves running around everywhere. But there weren't, and I couldn't help the disappointment that surged through me. We had just squished in the little crawl-like space between two houses when movement flashed in the corner of my eye. I quickly shoved the Mayra into the side of the house and slapped my hand over her mouth as one grumpy-looking guard stormed past the little alley with cursed words tumbling under his breath. I didn't let go of her until he exited the village. "Ow!" she groaned and rubbed the back of her head as I stuck my head out into the main street. "We really shouldn't be here, Emmy," she mumbled as I turned around and walked towards the end of the alley. Bingo! There was a little space between the back of the stores and houses for a few small bodies to fit through. I shot her a victorious smile and wiggled my way into the little space. I could hear the profanities grumbled under her breath, but chose to ignore them. I was the one who persisted in coming here. She had a right to be a little peeved. "It's not too late to turn back, you know." She tried once again to persuade me from the goal I was 100% set on. I shot her an apologetic smile. The space was so small that we were nearly squished flush against each other. and I could practically feel the fear streaming off her.
No one has caught us yet. We can turn around and go home. One look. I only need one look. I honestly had no idea why I was so adamant about seeing him. It truly was a stupid idea. I wished I could have just stayed home on my little cot next to some cozy fire and be content with the image my imagination created of him, but I couldn't. It wasn't a fascination to see him. It was a need. "What happens if we get caught?" she whispered as we edged our way behind the houses. I honestly wasn't sure where we were going, but this way felt right, so I was sticking with it. "Honestly? I have no clue. I'll probably just wing it." Her arms shot out of the air and gripped me tighter than any death grip she had ever given. I turned to her with a raised eyebrow. Her wide, terrified eyes stared back in anger. "You'll just wing it?" I shrugged my shoulders and nodded. Her hazel eyes only widened even more. I turned away from her and began scooting back down the passage. I haven't really thought ahead this far. I was almost positive we would have been caught by now. "I'm going back, Emily. This was a horrible idea." "Shh," I hissed, as loud voices suddenly broke through the silence surrounding us. I grabbed hold of her hand and crouched down low as shadows passed the end of the passage, just 4 feet away from us. She squished against my back in terror. At least one of us had something to lean on. "The king is running late, something about some stragglers near the border." A gruff voice that suggested the owner was twice the size of a normal man reached our ears. I gulped. The quiet gasp of terror that passed from Mara's lips let me know she was thinking the same thing as I was. Was he talking about us? "You'd think they would learn by now," another voice chuckled as I pushed Mara and I back a foot when the shadows drew closer to the passage's opening. I didn't even want to think about what would happen if we were caught now. In their village, right under their noses? Fear raced down my spine. God, we should have turned back. We should still turn back. But I can't. Just one look. "The king is running late. Something about some stragglers near the border." Relief slammed into my chest, and I tried to hold back my heavy sigh as Mara slumped heavily against me. Luck must have been on our side that day. "The ceremony is about to start. Are you headed that way?" Their voices trailed off as their shadows faded away, and I nearly fell on my hands and knees in relief. We weren't caught, and that hadn't been us they were talking about. That was close. "We should really go now," Mara whispered, and tugged on my hand as I climbed back onto my feet. "Are you crazy? Did you hear what they were saying? There's a ceremony going on, and we get to find out what." Excitement overtook my fear, and I was holding onto her hand with new vigor. As I checked the small street outside the passage, the king of the West and his people were not only highly feared, but also highly secretive. No one knew what they did all the way up in their tight-knit little village, and we were going to find out. Not only did I finally get to see him, but I got to see a little glimpse into their culture as well. That was more than any shifter at the base of the mountain ever saw. I pulled Mara across the vacant, snow-covered cobblestone street and into an alley that held a bright light at the end. I edged us as close as I dared. On the other side of the 2 wooden plank stores, where we were crouching behind, was a flat area filled to the brim with people. Most of them were huge male figures, with small children and women woven in between them. Whoa! There were stories about the size of the northern soldiers, and despite a few confirmations from those in the lower kingdom, many thought they were over-exaggerated. They weren't. In the middle of the throng of people, there was a raised platform with 6 large wooden chairs sitting in a row and a throne sitting proudly between them. "I can't see anything," I groaned as someone walked onto the stage and the villagers cheered. The loud, booming voices of the men sent vibrations through my entire body. These people made me feel like a 4-foot-tall munchkin.
Maybe that's a good thing, Mara mumbled as I stood on my tiptoes and tried to glance over the tall bodies 15 feet away from us. This could be an execution or a punishment, Em. We shouldn't be here. Help me look for somewhere higher to watch. I had barely finished speaking when I saw a thin copper ladder attached to the side of the house we were crouched against. I couldn't help the smile that reached my lips. Yes! No, Emily, don't. I ignored the desperate plea in her voice and reached up until I had a firm grip on the bottom rung. I wanted to laugh out loud at the excitement surging through me, but I knew better than that. It took me a good minute or two before I could haul myself up enough to plant my feet on the bottom of the old iron ladder. Are you coming or what? I whispered down at her as I began climbing the rest of the way to the roof. When I finally pulled myself onto the hard wooden roof with the grumpy Mara following behind me, 6 ginormous males had begun filing onto the stage. I sent her a sly smile, which she chose to ignore. I knew she would follow. We crouched low to the floor of the roof and hid behind the small ledge that enclosed the building. We could see everything from this height, and thankfully, they couldn't see us. Hopefully, they couldn't see us. We watched 6 giant, brutish-looking men walk along the stage and take what I assumed were their respective seats. The throne remained empty. I frowned. Where was he? That unnatural feeling hidden deep inside me flipped uneasily as a man shorter and thinner than the rest walked onto the stage. Something about him was off and dark. Please don't let that be the king. I apologize for the delay. He didn't yell or shout, but his voice reverberated throughout the whole area without major effort. Wow, only the elders in our village could do that. Our great king had some important matters to attend to, but now the ceremony can begin. The crowd cheered as the creepy announcer raised his hands. I watched in blatant wonder as he held his thin, long white arm out towards the stone steps at the base of the platform. The cheers were quiet and respectful as a figure the size of 2 male villagers put together stepped onto the stage. My eyes widened at the impossible size of the man. That was definitely the king. There, Emily, you saw him. Can we please go now? Mara begged as her eyes darted around the large guards below us. I frowned in disappointment. You're kidding, right? We haven't seen any of him. Which was true. That nagging in my head didn't fade or diminish as the big, no doubt muscle-covered figure took a seat on his throne. He was covered from head to toe in black. He wore a long black cloak over equally black pants and a tunic that clung to his huge body. A hood was pulled far over his head and hid all features from the view of his people, and me. I'm sure this is what his people see every day. We cannot risk being here any longer. She tugged on my hand and tried to edge back towards the ladder, but I only dragged her down again. Not yet! I want to see what the ceremony is. She let out a loud groan and fell flat on her stomach beside me. Emmy, please. I hardly ever beg, but I'm begging you now. Please let's go while everyone is distracted. It's starting. I waved her off as the announcer gained the attention back from the crowd and away from the king, but I couldn't find it in me to tear my eyes off him. He looked like he was trying to appear lazy and relaxed in a throne that was so ginormous it had to be made specifically for him, but I could see the way he leaned slightly off his right shoulder. He was in pain. A phantom ache surged through my own arm, and I rubbed it absent-mindedly as the creepy announcer addressed the crowd once again. On this 5th day of the new year, we gather together to celebrate the ceremony of our great king's birthday. I groaned in disappointment as the crowd once again clapped and let out respectful cheers. They were here for his birthday. Just perfect. We stumbled on a great secret ceremony, but I still didn't want to leave, and I couldn't tear my gaze off the overly large man resting against the back of the throne. His arms crossed lazily over his chest, his left shoulder hanging just a fraction lower than the right. I had no idea why I noticed it or how, but that small symbol of pain drew my eyes to him like a magnet. Despite that, his body language suggested that he was just as annoyed with the ceremony as I was. The announcer person I didn't like started trailing off about something to do with the moon and stars and some cosmic thing.
But I was staring too hard at the king to notice. Just one look, one glimpse was all I needed, and then we could run out of here like the underworld was on our heels. I just needed him to turn his head up a little bit, just enough so the light of the sun could hit his face under that hood. What are you doing? I hadn't realized I was leaning over the edge of the roof, like I could somehow get closer to him, until Mara's hand suddenly gripped onto my arm and yanked me back. If anyone had looked up at that moment, they would have seen me hanging almost completely over the side of the building, and we would have been screwed. "Shoot!" I hissed as she pulled me back down and crouched low like that would help with what had just happened. "Did anyone see you?" she gasped as we crouched even lower on the roof. I didn't dare try to glance at the crowd. "I have no idea. Let me check." My voice as well as my body shook as I carefully peeked over the edge. A breath of relief left me when I saw everyone's attention focused on the announcer, even the men sitting in the 6 chairs on stage. Except one. Chapter 2. Holy cow! I hardly cussed, usually never, but as a pair of eyes so lightning blue that I could feel their electricity pierce my soul, locked on mine, it seemed fitting. He had seen me. The King of the West had seen my fumble and was staring up at me in a gaze that froze the very air in my lungs. Our eyes locked, my heart stopped, and his curious, hooded head tilted to the side. There was this sudden, disturbing feeling in my stomach, one that turned uneasily and made me want to hurl. I groaned as my grip on the edge turned my knuckles white. Oh my God. He was gorgeous. The rumors and tales of his beauty from the South were nothing compared to the thing that was staring up at me now. I gulped. What? What is it? Myra hissed as she peeked up from her hiding spot. I couldn't stop her, couldn't pull her away before she saw the damage I had caused. I was as frozen as a statue. "Oh my God, Emily, he's looking right at us. We need to go, now!" I didn't argue with her as she tore my hand from the edge and dragged me back towards the ladder. I couldn't break eye contact with him. I physically could not. Something in those lightning eyes was holding me captive and refusing to let go. It made panic flare in my chest. I felt like I was in a trance, like my body was only agreeing to follow Myra down the ladder, because that was what I needed to do to get closer to him. I was too dumb to realize how truly terrified I was. The spell was broken as those terrifyingly beautiful eyes glanced at the frantic girl pulling me towards the ladder. I felt air suddenly return to my lungs as his electric gaze hardened and his hands gripped tightly onto the armrests of his throne. Definitely time to go. I finally tore my eyes off him before he could lock our gazes again and rushed down the ladder after Myra. Oh my God. We took off running in a vicious sprint the minute our feet hit solid ground. I didn't care about sneaking around anymore or being quiet. Our main goal was to get the heck out of there as fast as possible. I was terrified that one of his infamous huge warriors would jump out of the houses surrounding us and tear at our throats with their sharp, fang-like teeth. I ran faster. We were just at the edge of the village, no guard in sight, when the shouting started. Loud, deep male voices rang throughout the whole town as the sound of stomping feet pounded the pavement. "Run, Myra!" I shouted as we burst out of the village and ran full speed into the dense trees of the forest. Our only hope was that the thick foliage and the heavy snowfall would cover our presence. But against wolfborns, I doubted we would make it out of there alive.
especially since he saw us, the very one who sent cities trembling at the near thought of. My heart pounded viciously in my chest as fear coursed through my body. He had seen me. We had locked gazes. The king of the West saw an intruder with his very own terrifyingly gorgeous eyes, and I do not doubt the feeling creeping down my spine was death. I was going to die today.
We didn't stop for rest or air as we ran full speed down the dirt path we took to get there. Myra's shifter was enough to keep her going for a while, but my need to not die was all I had going for me. I tried to push faster as the shouts behind us only grew in both tone and number. They were definitely after us now, and by the sounds of it, they were a lot faster than we were. We weren't far enough away when Myra suddenly couldn't hold back her animal anymore. Her fear was far too intense to remain human. Her clothes shredded to pieces as she shifted mid-run, and the sleek pelt of her snow leopard emerged as she shot like a bullet away from me. My heart dropped to my stomach as I watched her fly away from me. Well, hopefully she will be able to get away. I didn't stop running, though. I couldn't shift, and I knew they would catch me sooner or later, but I still kept going, like a last-ditch effort to keep my short life. She stopped several meters ahead, and her glistening white fur shimmered as she glanced back with a whine, but I waved her off. "Go, Myra! Run! Get Lennox!" She whined again and pawed the ground, but I waved harder and screamed at her to go. She had a chance to get away, and I would only slow her down if she waited for me, and I highly doubted we would be able to outrun wolfborns if I were on her back. She needed to go. She let out one last long whine before turning on her heels and heading in the direction of her brother's tower. Her brother Lennox was pretty much in charge of our little village at the base of the mountain, and he was the only chance I had, if the king let me live. I knew I wasn't going to escape them, no way, no how, but that didn't stop the small shred of hope glowing in my chest. If I could reach the border of their territory and the towns, they wouldn't be able to do anything without negotiations. But I knew that was impossible. It took us half the day to get to the border of our village and the rest to reach his kingdom. At least Myra, in her leopard form, could reach it in an hour or two. I could hear loud howls behind me, the thundering roars of a people whose privacy had just been infringed on. I knew in that very moment that there was no hope for my life. If they caught me, I would die. I snuck across their border, across their land, into their village, and witnessed part of their ceremony without being detected. Their pride would not let them let me live. At least I got to see him before I died. I shook my head and shoved on. Was it worth it? That glimpse I so desperately craved? Was breaking into his kingdom, his ceremony to see him worth my life? The nagging need in my head had disappeared, only to be replaced with one that begged me to turn around and stare into those beautiful eyes until I died, until he killed me. Was it worth my life? Yes, it was. Eventually, I had to stop running. I couldn't help it. Air wouldn't reach my lungs, and I had a cramp the size of the lower kingdom stuck in my side. I needed a minute, just a minute to regain my breathing. Then I could run again. But luck had left my side, and I didn't get that minute I so desperately needed. The howls that reached my ears in the quickly fading daylight were too close for comfort. My hands ran furiously through my hair as I frantically looked for some kind of hiding spot, any kind. It was when I heard the sound of pounding paws on snow that I found a little cubby-like hole dug at the base of a tree. My heart soared in my chest. "Freaking yes," I murmured, and dived into the little cubby without thinking of the little critter's home, which I probably just disturbed. I tried to still my breathing and ease my rapidly pounding heart as a group of wolves that were twice my size and equally as ferocious looking came storming down the path I had barely escaped. I pressed back into the dark cut of the tree as far as I could. I was terrified they could hear my heart, could smell the fear rolling off me in waves as they paused and sniffed the air. I just prayed that the smell of the surrounding bushes was strong enough to mask my scent. They were so tall I could only see their paws as they clawed at the ground and howled. They truly were wolfborn, those that hail solely from the moon, night worshippers in their finest. Their stories and rumors were almost as great as their kings. I closed my eyes and prayed they wouldn't find me.
They howled one last time before pawing at the ground and taking off back down the mountain. I prayed my arrow was already across the border. I can't believe that worked. I felt hope start to swell in my chest, but quickly squished it down as I waited a few more minutes in the little cubbyhole. I wasn't going even to let myself think of hope until I reached the border, if I reached the border. I waited until the silence filling the dense forest was once again humming with the sounds of the small creatures living there. I let out a heavy sigh as the moon slowly took its respectable spot in the sky, and I began to edge my way out of my hiding spot slowly. I let out a heavy sigh and rested my head against the cold snow as I tried to clear the fear-filled thoughts running freely through my mind. There was no way I was going to get out of there alive, at least not while I was on that path. There would no doubt be patrols surrounding all paths on every side of the territory until the intruders were caught. If I kept running down that one, I was bound to collide with a guard or worse, a wolf. My only choice was to go off-road, to make my own path down a haphazard mountain I had never scaled before. Here goes nothing, I groaned as I turned off the path and headed in the opposite direction of the ginormous wolves that I'm pretty sure were set on eating me.
I had no idea how long I was walking. My only judge of time was the moon's position in the sky, and even that didn't offer any comfort. I felt like the further I walked, the further I wandered into the density of the forest. Many feared these woods, these trees. The rumors that circled them were almost as intense as those of the King of the West, but I feared him more, even if his eyes were the most beautiful, crystal clear, electric blue I had ever seen. I wandered further down the mountain and into the dense forest. Those eyes were unlike any I had ever seen before. The way they had held me there on the roof, the way they caused my whole being to freeze, was unlike anything I had ever felt before. I hadn't wanted to leave, to move. I wanted to stay in that very same position and never look away. And the freakiest part was that for a moment, just a moment, I thought he wanted that too. He hadn't freaked when he saw me standing there, peeking up at him over the roof. He didn't automatically call his guards to capture us. He had just sat there silently and stared with as much curiosity as I did at him. It was unnerving. A branch snapping somewhere from behind drew me from my thoughts, and I halted as the sounds of the forest quieted once more. I could feel eyes now, watching me, following my every movement. There were no small trips of the birds or murmurs of other little animals, a telltale sign that a predator was among them. Fear gripped my heart in an icy cage. Were they back? Did they follow my scent? This wasn't good. Another branch snapped behind me as if large paws couldn't find quiet places to put them. Relax, Emily. Breathe. I told myself quietly as I gripped tightly at the end of my sleeves. I'm sure it's not a wolf. Maybe it's a bear or a mountain lion. Neither of those options was reassuring either. When a growl so low and powerful that it sent a shock of vibration through me sounded in the silence, I ran like my little bitty heart would never give out from overexertion. I didn't make it very far. I had barely run 5 feet before the beast tackled me to the ground from behind. The air was knocked out of me for a few long, fearful seconds, and I sat there gasping as the giant monster pinned me to the ground. From what I could tell, by the weight crushing me, the body was huge, at least twice as large as the wolves I saw before, and more around 4 times the size of me. A body that big should have crushed me to death in an instant. I wasn't sure if I should be thankful that it didn't. I sucked in lungfuls of air as the beast eased slightly off my trembling body. I didn't want to turn around and face it. I just wanted to curl in a ball and bury my face in my knees, but a dark growl had me cautiously rolling over to my back. Then I screamed the ever-loving daylight out of me. Ah! The shrill sound of my voice reverberated through the trees, but I didn't get much more out as the giant wolf's head launched from my throat. My scream stuck in my lungs, and my eyes slammed shut as I waited for the inevitable tearing of flesh those giant fangs would rip from my throat, along with the agonizing pain of death, but it never came.
I trembled in terrified fear as I felt hot breath continuously hit my cheek, neck, and shoulder. Teeth just barely touched the edge of my skin as a hot, wet pressure rested firmly against the base of my throat.
I slowly pried my eyes open to stare up at a wolf whose fur was blacker than the night sky during a new moon, hovering over me with my neck grasped gently in its ginormous jaw. It wasn't tearing into me, it wasn't killing me, but it was making me know damn well that it could. The beast's want was simple: shut the hell up. So, I did. We stayed in that silent stance for a few long minutes as the abnormally giant creature made sure I knew who the dominant one was in this situation, and I was all too eager to agree. Anything to keep my throat safely intact. I lay flat on the ground when the wolf finally let go of me and kept the scream that so desperately wanted to breach my lips stuffed tightly down my throat. The colossal beast didn't move off me as he raised his head, a head that was larger than any animal I had ever seen, and glanced down at me. I gasped. Those eyes. The eyes I had been wondering about for my entire disastrous trip down the mountain. Eyes so blue they put the daytime sky to shame. This ginormous monster was the king of the West. My heart dropped to my stomach. Good Lord, I really was going to die. He let out a hot breath of air that blew straight at my face. I gulped. His beautiful eyes narrowed and his giant head tilted to the side like it had the first time our eyes locked together. All four of his ginormous, muscled legs kept me trapped under him. I shuddered under his glare. He was probably thinking of the best way to eat me. But he didn't. Our gaze stayed locked in that intense stare as his electrifying blue eyes shot lightning straight to the pit of my stomach. His gaze made my insides feel frozen, but it wasn't necessarily uncomfortable. The longer I gazed up at that beautiful blue, the more I never wanted to look away. It was hauntingly beautiful, in a hazardous kind of way. My nervous, fearful breathing slowly eased until it matched the relatively calm ones of the wolf. He seemed so relaxed, so at ease, that it made my body slowly follow suit. My mind was too far gone in his eyes to notice, but that's when I caught the slight tremor in his left arm. The arm that I could tell was hurt earlier. It must be bothering him to stand on it for this long, much less suffer through all that running I was sure he did to track me down. I tore my eyes away from his agonizingly beautiful ones to glance over his injured arm. He let out a dark growl at the action, and I stiffened under him as his lip raised in a snarl. My eyes glanced back over to his as he tried to hide the slight tremor. He let out another growl again. "You're hurt." My voice was barely a whisper as I glanced over my shoulder at his arm. His body froze above me for a second, just a second, before he let out another snarl. I can help you." I gulped. What exactly was I trying to do? Escape in any way I could? Help him? I had no idea, but the insane part of me that needed to see him and noticed he was hurt in the first place wanted me to do something desperately. I slowly raised my hand from its trapped position at my side and went to gently touch his left arm, which let out a slight shake next to my shoulder. He growled as my hand got closer to him. "It's okay," I eased softly as my fingertips gently brushed over the muscle just above his paw. It wasn't hurt there. It was in his shoulder that the tendon had torn, but I didn't want to frighten him. Isn't this an ironic situation? "See, I won't hurt you."
I eased softly as I let just the tip of my fingers run from the paw that was as big as my face up to his muscled knee. I saw amusement flash in those bright blue eyes, and he seemed almost to let out a wolfish snicker. I couldn't help the smile that tugged at my own lips. I guess he was right. He could kill me with a hurt shoulder or not. I just said I wouldn't hurt him as a formality. I honestly had no idea why I wanted to help the king who sent his beast after me and my friend, but this aching tug inside of me demanded that I do. "Let me help you, please?" I asked softly as I ran my fingers along his soft paw again. He snapped his jaw shut and hesitated for a moment before he let out one more growl. Was that a no, or... He eased his ginormous body off me and slowly sat not an inch away from my left side. I carefully and very slowly rose to a sitting position next to him. I didn't want to make any sudden moves and have him lunge at me again. His beautiful eyes watched me in cold calculation as I slowly turned my body toward his. I licked my lips and tried not to let fear race down my spine as I placed one hand on the part of his arm just below his shoulder and the other out in the open for him to see. "Do you mind if I touch the part that hurts?" I asked softly as his abnormally large head turned to look at me. He didn't growl or snarl, so I took that as a yes, but I still proceeded with caution. I didn't need him to change his mind at the last minute and eat me. I could see the torn tendon throbbing painfully under his fur and skin, and I frowned at the red lines of pain flowing down his arm. "This looks incredibly painful," I mumbled more to myself than anything else, as I gently, and with one hand, probed the area around the tendon. "Don't you wolfborns heal incredibly fast or something?" I grumbled, as I gently rubbed down the red pain line with 2 fingers. I had only been able to see pain in someone else one other time, and that time hadn't been pleasant either. I don't know why the healing sight comes or goes, but it does, and like the nagging inside my head, it wanted me to help him. He rolled his beautiful eyes and let out something close to a snort. I sent him a slight glare, but otherwise ignored him. "This might hurt a little, so don't bite my head off, okay?" I mumbled, as I finally let my other hand rest gently on his upper arm. He locked our gazes again, and I stared into those blue eyes for a few long seconds before he gave me a slow blink. I took that as a yes. I gripped onto his upper arm tightly for some form of stability as I let my other hand rub gently across the torn tendon. I hadn't done this since I was a kid, and the last time I ended up unconscious for 3 days. I didn't even want to think about what would happen now, so my dumb self didn't. Helping him was my #1 top priority at the moment, not my safety, and that knowledge alone confused me. But I didn't linger on it long. That nagging in me wouldn't let me. "Here goes nothing," I grumbled, as he stared down at me with an amused curiosity. This pompous wolf didn't believe I could help him. Well, I'll show him. I closed my eyes, let out a few deep breaths until I felt slightly lightheaded and embraced that slight glow of heat that simmered in my chest. When I felt that my mind and body had a firm grasp on the beautiful gold humming through my being, I pressed my thumb into his torn tendon. He howled into the night air as my finger jammed itself into his hurt shoulder and tried to tug himself away from me viciously, but the gold shimmer well, I don't really know what it was zipping through me more potent than the lightning in his eyes had, and it was holding him firmly in my grasp. At least he wasn't trying to bite me. This was a power I could not control. It controlled me, my soul, and it let me tap into it now and then. It liked this beast that was trying to tear itself from me. The beautiful golden warmth flowed from my chest, down my arm, into my thumb, and then finally into the torn tendon of his shoulder. As soon as the gold hit his wound, he froze. His body no longer desperately tried to rid itself of my hold, and I could feel his eyes watching me in amazement as I kept mine closed and hummed.
As the gold shimmer healed the tendon, my eyes slowly blinked open, and I watched the red lines of pain shooting down his arm turn to gold as this power healed him. I let out a small smile. There, that was better. Once I was satisfied it had done its job, I tried to call the power back to me, back to my chest and into my soul, where it would rest once again. But it denied me. I gasped as a full-blown surge of power ripped through my chest and into his body. It wanted him. It wanted to be in him. I could feel it. It tried to flow into his heart, into his being, and heal every scratch, scar, and cut in his body. Air escaped my lungs as more and more of the gold power fled my body and into his. Black dots danced around my vision, and I clawed at my throat with my free hand. I couldn't let go of him. I couldn't drop my hand. The gold power wouldn't let me. It no longer wanted to be in me, in my soul. It wanted to be in his. And it was going to kill me to do so if it had to. I heard him let out a strangled cry and bark as my thumb dug deeper into his shoulder. I'm sorry. I wanted to cry out to him, to let him know that I didn't mean to hurt him, but the power wouldn't let me breathe enough to say anything. Tears suddenly streamed down my cheeks as air refused to enter my lungs, and the black dots dancing around my vision were quickly growing until all I could see were thin slits of the moon's light. I clawed at my throat and then the ground, like that would help me cut the power off, but it didn't. I felt the wolf biting gently into my wrist, like that would make me let go. It didn't. And the harder he bit, the more the golden power wanted to be in him. So this was the end. This was how I was going to die. That warm, golden power I had thought was a gift was draining from me faster than blood from a cut wrist. And it was killing me. At least I helped him. The last thing I was aware of was a wet tongue sprinting over my face, and a pair of bright, beautiful eyes staring worriedly into mine. Chapter 3. There was a hard warmth radiating against the side of my body, a smooth, solid warmth that I tried to cling to with all my might, but my body wouldn't let me. I couldn't move. I couldn't feel any part of me except for the cold hitting my left side and that excellent warmth hitting my right. I could feel myself being lifted and carried, but I had no idea where. It had to have been far. The warmth had been holding me for quite a while. As time passed, I still couldn't move my body or open my eyes, but I could hear the sounds of the trees we passed and the breathing of what I assumed was a person carrying me. What happened to me? Why can't I move? Where was I? I couldn't make my mouth open to voice any of those plaguing questions, and the thought of never being able to move again raced across my mind. My breathing hitched in my chest as that fear hit my heart. Well, maybe hyperventilating was a good sign. Shh. It's okay. My panic eased. That voice, it was beautiful, like the sound of a waterfall you would listen to from a distance, or the dark melody of the creatures of a night. I wanted to hear it over and over again. I wanted those two words replaying in my head for an eternity. I decided the voice belonged to the person carrying me, the one who was so warm it traveled through my whole body. It wasn't long before the sleep started to swamp over my shoulders again. The panic began to grow. No, if I sleep, I might miss hearing him talk. I couldn't sleep. I could barely feel that warm body stop walking and grip tighter onto my immobile body. I wanted to push further into it, let that warmth flow over my entire being. But the vague sound of angry voices reached my ears, and I tried my hardest to listen before that cloud of sleep overtook my mind. "What have you done?" I was barely able to make out that one sentence before the voices went to barely their mumbles. "Give her to me. Healers will help." "She's awake?" I felt my body lift from the warmth that had kept me safe, and the fear of being taken away from that voice I could listen to for hours hit me hard. My chest tightened, and the air had a harder time reaching my lungs. The minute that warmth I wanted to cling to vanished desperately. I couldn't control my body, and I couldn't stop hyperventilating the panic brought on. It was gone. That voice, that warmth, it was gone. It wasn't coming back. It left me alone, leaving me in danger. I needed it. Shh. I'm right here. That beautiful voice was in my ears again, and as that warmth surrounded me once more, the hyperventilating stopped. The body curled me tighter into it like I had been asking it to the whole time. Well, this is a problem, I heard a voice mumble from the distance, as the sleep that wanted to take over from before finally did so desperately. Light shone brightly down onto my closed eyelids, and I groaned. My body ached, and my chest and lungs felt sore. From what, I had no idea. I took a few ragged breaths and gently clutched at the sheet beneath me before slowly opening my crusty eyes. Despite the few beams of light shining through the window, the tiny room I was lying in held a candle, its light barely visible, sitting on a little wooden table in the corner of the room with that prominent, kind town leader sitting beside it. A small smile pulled at my cracked lips. "Hey, Lennox." My voice was hoarse and relatively weak, and I cringed as the sound reached my ears. Lennox jerked awake, and his large brown eyes flashed to mine. "You're awake." He let out a tired sigh, but shot me a broad smile as he stood from the wooden stool, so he could kneel beside me. "I was so worried about you, little cub," he mumbled as he reached up and gently rubbed down my hair. The dark brown of his eyes shone down at me in worry. "I'm okay." My throat was dry and it hurt to speak as my voice croaked past my lips. "Here, drink this," he commanded instead of answering, and held a small cup of water up to my lips. I drank from it greedily and pouted when he took it away. "Not too fast, you'll get sick." I gave a weak attempt at rolling my eyes, but he just laughed. Then all the humor faded from his voice. "Do you know how scared I was when Myra came storming into the house, shouting all these crazy things about the King of the West's guards chasing you?" I dropped my gaze in shame, but couldn't stop my breath from catching in my throat. Just hearing his title sent the memory of our disastrous adventure surging to the forefront of my mind. Oh my God, what had happened? What had made the gold power lose control like that? Why did it want him so much? Why did it try to hurt me? What the hell were you thinking, running off into the king's territory like that? You know it's forbidden. You know no one is even allowed near the border. I flinched at his tone, and my eyes widened as his strong hands gripped my upper arms tightly. I'm sorry, Lennox. I wasn't thinking." "You're right. You weren't thinking, Emily. What do you think would have happened if you had been caught before the king knew you were his..." His dark eyes flashed, and he snapped his mouth shut before glancing away from me. I felt a frown pull up my lips. Did healing the king make me something to him? His healer? Because if that's the case, then they could all forget it. I was never going to use the gold power again. Before he knew I was his what? Lennox licked his lips and let out a heavy sigh before standing from the side of the cot I was lying on. "Let me go get the elders. They wanted me to wait to talk to you until they were present."
What? Wait, why? Dealing with the elders was never fun. They really only ever got involved with the villagers' business when something terrible had happened, or a decision regarding the entire town had to be made. They let Lennox usually handle everything, and his dad before him. I didn't even want to wonder why they were suddenly interested in me.
I blinked up at him in confusion as he turned to leave the room. "I'll tell you everything in a minute." The anger from my disobedience seemed to have vanished from his gaze, but it was only replaced with the thick sheen of worry. It made my frown grow. I tried to sit up on the bed, but my body ached, and I could hardly move my arms enough to prop my upper body against the pillows. I let out a heavy sigh and just waited. It was barely a few minutes before the town leader returned with the 4 elders of our little village, which only made the worry in my chest grow. It usually took hours to assemble the small council of the town, if not days, and here they were waiting for me. "Little cub, there really isn't any easy way to approach this, but Lennox started, his brown eyes dark, but a stern look from Elder Zayden had him clearing his throat and starting over. My nerves grew. This really wasn't going to be a pleasant meeting. Elder Kane stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on Myera's older brother's shoulder, who shot him a relieved smile. "We have reason to believe that you are the King of the West's mate." My heart seemed to stop as silence followed Elder Kane's statement, and all I could do was stare up at the 4 white-robed figures in confusion. But that's impossible. You said that was impossible." None of them seemed to want to meet my gaze, and for the first time in my entire existence, I watched them stare nervously at the ground or at one another. Yes, Elder Rhine finally stepped forward to answer, but even her voice seemed uncertain as it filled the tiny room. "We have reason to believe that you are the King of the West's mate." My heart seemed to stop as silence followed Elder Kane's statement, and all I could do was stare up at the 4 white-robed figures in confusion. But that's impossible. You said that was impossible." None of them seemed to want to meet my gaze, and for the first time in my entire existence, I watched them stare nervously at the ground or at one another. Yes, Elder Rhine finally stepped forward to answer, but even her voice seemed uncertain as it filled the tiny room. "The circumstances that came from the events that took place on your journey into their territory." Kane's eyes darkened, and the glare he shot me didn't hide the fact that he was unhappy about my rule-breaking adventure. I clenched my mouth shut. "We are going to ask you some questions regarding your encounter with the king, Emily. And we need your honest answers, all right? This should clear all the confusion." That was Elder Larissa. She was my favorite out of all 4, honestly, and her easygoing, mother-like presence helped ease the twisted jumble of thoughts and emotions running through my head. I paused for an uncertain moment before nodding and letting Lennox prop my pillows as the elders all took a seat around the bed on chairs I hadn't realized were there. "Why did you venture into his territory?" Kane's voice filled the room before all others, and I hesitated before answering. They wanted the truth, and I wanted to give it to them, but I feel like admitting the whole reason I wanted to go was because of this nagging voice in my head begging me for just one look at the king. I wanted to see if the rumors about the Wolfborns were true, which wasn't a lie. I wanted to know that too. All of the elders were, well, elderly. They had to be to make the council. But Elder Keen had a specific, wrinkly bully look going for him. He wasn't a council member anyone really wanted to deal with. His beady eyes narrowed at my answer. "Let's move on." Elder Larissa interrupted softly before bringing her warm, inviting gaze back to mine. "What did you feel the first time you saw him, the king?" She asked gently as Lennox stood almost protectively by my side. The council did make big decisions for the town, but if there was a tie, he was the deciding factor. Having him at my side was more than soothing. "I didn't really see him at all. He covered himself from head to toe." "Did you see any part of him at all? Anything he might have revealed?" Images from our brief encounter flashed through my mind, and my heart skipped at the memories. Those eyes that shone bluer than any sea I had ever seen, and made my soul freeze in awe. Yes, I remember the feeling of seeing them for the first time, that sucker punch to my stomach. It felt like someone had punched me straight in the stomach. I didn't miss how they all seemed to shift uneasily at the statement, even Lennox. And you felt this when you met his gaze, yes? My frown returned, and I glanced uneasily between the 5 sitting around me. My hands curled the blanket around my fingers nervously. How do you know that? I stammered as their eyes all bore holes into my gaze. I was suddenly feeling more than uncomfortable, like all of my thoughts and feelings were out on display for them all to see. Elder Larissa's sympathetic look didn't pass me by, and it only made the confusing mess that was my mind worse. Different shifters find their mates in different ways. She spoke softly, her words warm as she tried to give me a reassuring glance. Well, that didn't answer my question at all. In Wolfborns, they recognize their mate through eyes or locked gazes. My fingers twitched unsteadily at my side. Through eyes? His eyes had been the most bizarre, strangest, beautiful lightning eyes I had ever seen. They were an oddity that I could never seem to break my gaze from. But that didn't mean I was his mate. Myra was there too. She saw how different his eyes were. "Emily?" Lennox said softly as my voice started to rise in panic. I shot my wide eyes over to him. He seemed calm enough, but his dark eyes were rather sad, and they did nothing to settle the unease in my stomach. We asked her. She said there was nothing significant about them. I ignored the slight grip he had on my shoulder and let out a ragged breath. That wasn't true. His eyes were significant. They weren't any run-of-the-mill, ordinary eyes. They sparked with an electricity that I could feel shooting through me in just a glance. She just didn't get a good enough look at them. We were both there when he gave you back to us. There was nothing special about them. I felt tears prickle my eyes as Lennox's voice slowly washed over me. This was all becoming extremely overwhelming. I sniffled and I tried to raise my hand to rub at my stinging eyes, but failed miserably. My body still didn't want to really move. "What do you mean he gave you back to me?" I mumbled around the tight knot in my throat as his dark brown eyes gazed down at me worriedly. He shot me a small smile before glancing over to the 4 elders watching our exchange quietly. "He met us at the edge of the border with you in his arms. I thought he had harmed you in some way at first, but Mara convinced me to hear what he had to say. Or his soldiers, at least. He didn't really talk. His eyes flashed angrily at that, before softening and shining down at me once again. He did tell us about the gold power, though, and how it tried to... He couldn't finish his sentence, and his dark eyes flashed sadly before glancing away from me. He licked his lips. "How did it try to hurt you?" "Yes, we found that very interesting as well." Kane finished for him and edged closer to the bed as Lennox edged away. I shifted uneasily on the cot. I didn't like being surrounded like this, especially by the Elder Council. It was more frightening than anything. They often decided whether criminals lived or died. "Why would the gold power try to hurt you like that?" Larissa asked softly as I tried not to make it too obvious that I kept burrowing further into my pillow and blankets. I swallowed uneasily. "I'm not really sure, but it wanted him." I fell asleep as a wave of sleep washed over me. I pushed it aside. I don't know how else to explain it, but I healed his arm, and then the power would not let me draw it back inside. I let out a shaky sigh and looked over to a frown-stricken Lennox. It was like it no longer wanted to be a part of me. Every single inch of the power wanted to be in him,
and it was going to hurt me if it had to. Silence filled the tiny, cramped room as my words hung in the air uneasily around us. The four elders seemed oddly still, calculating. It was nerve-wracking and did nothing to help the anxiety raging through me. It was only a few moments before Elder Zadin broke the tense silence, but it felt like an awkward eternity. Chapter 4. It was 3 weeks before I saw him again, the King of the West, and I was starting to highly doubt the opportunity would ever arise. Most of that time was spent being poked and prodded by the few doctors the village had. Everyone in the town knew about the gold power, about the healing abilities I sometimes had, but no one knew why. They had seen me use it the only other time it let me, on a little girl who decided to play too close to the town's center fire, but no one understood it. Especially me. I felt like I had been put under a magnifying glass and all but dissected so they could find out why the power wanted the king so badly. It was exhausting. When I wasn't at the healing shop or sitting through boring exams with the elders, I was practically locked in my room and only allowed to leave with an approved escort. It was insufferable. It was like no one trusted me anymore, or no one trusted what I was capable of anymore. They didn't understand that I was still the same me, just a me who couldn't control whatever's inside me and apparently made it to the king. The king. The King of the West. My mate. It truly seemed like a ridiculous notion. Ever since I was a child, the entire town told me it was impossible for someone like me to have a mate. But the elders have never been proven wrong before, and maybe it was the king who had been mistaken. What exactly would he get from claiming me, though? The gold power? If he was willing to go through the trouble of all this mockery just for a little unexplored magic, he could have it. After all, it seemed to want him more than me anyway. If it was trying to hurt me, it was anything but. Besides, I didn't know a lot about mates. But what one would leave theirs for weeks on end without a care? Emily? I glanced up from the dark trees I had been staring at through the window pane to see Lennox standing in my open doorway, a worried frown creasing his forehead. What is it? It wasn't Lennox's fault I had been condemned to live my foreseeable future locked away in my room, but I couldn't help but feel like he didn't do everything he could. I didn't feel comfortable here anymore. I felt like a new species everyone wanted to desperately tear open to see what was inside. It was maddening. His dark eyes turned their gaze out the window I was perched against as his rather large body leaned against the old wooden doorframe. He and his sister were the same kind of shifter. Their whole family was, and their bodies were built more lean and toned to fit their animal than other shifters were. Like the family that shifted into bears on the other side of town, they were larger and hairier than anything. The heavy snow will be falling soon. I want to leave for the lower kingdom before then. I'm still going? His eyes flickered down to mine, and he raised a dark eyebrow.
Why wouldn't you? I shrugged my shoulders and turned my gaze back out the rather dirty window. The famous dark clouds of the northern snowstorms were starting to roll in over the horizon, and the wind was quickly beginning to carry the fallen leaves down the mountainside in a cascade. Light snow always fell before the end of fall, and then the dense cold of winter hit. We had barely a few weeks before then. I grew up at the base of the mountain with Mayra of her family. We were used to snow and the cold, but for some reason, the three of us always went to the lower kingdom during the heavy snow times. I can't remember a time when we spent the entire winter at the village. Only the warm waters of the lower kingdom filled my mind. Because I've been on luck and key for the past 3 weeks. Lennox let out a small sigh before leaning off the door to walk further into my rather small and cramped room. This is for your protection, Em. I thought you understood that. His voice wasn't sad, really, just tired,
as he took a seat on the bottom of my bed and rested his lithe body back on his hands. I tried not to roll my eyes. I understand this is more to study me than protect me. He stayed silent for a few long moments before reaching up to run a hand through his hair. "You know I love the snow," I grumbled as my eyes danced back out the window. I truly did love the snow and the cold. The lower kingdom was beautiful and lovely, but it was warm all year long. I hadn't experienced a northern mountain winter since I was a child. Yes, but this trip is needed now more than ever. His voice was low, soft, as it floated around the small wooden room. I could sense the hesitancy, the worry. This was about more than just the gold power. "You shouldn't worry so much, Lennox. I doubt what they say is true." He shot me a small smile before glancing out my open door. Yeah. I gave him a soft, sad tilt of my lips as he stood and headed for the dimly lit hall. "The first snowfall should be tonight. I'm sure the guards will be getting an early sleep." He gave me a pointed look with those dark eyes of his before he shot me a sly smile and disappeared down the hall. I couldn't help but smile after him. Lennox had been the only family Myra and I knew since we were children. I never knew my parents, and theirs died before Myra could know them. It had been the three of us for years, the orphans in charge of one of the King of the West's many towns. Lennox took care of us. He always did. Things changed that night, and I wasn't sure if it was for the better. Lennox was right. The first fall of the heavy snow began barely an hour after he left my room, and the guard stationed at my door was nowhere to be seen. I couldn't keep the smile off my face as I slipped on the snow-proof shoes Myra had bought me for my birthday and threw my thin cover over my nightshirt. My favorite thing about the fresh fall was watching my feet leave prints in the clean street. I watched my breath fog into the night air as I walked down the main road with slow, purposeful steps. I sighed and walked further towards the entrance of town. Everything was just so confusing now. I wished I had never listened to that nagging voice in the back of my head. I wished I had just stayed put in the village or gone down to the water with Myra. My mind has been in turmoil ever since I locked eyes with those electrifying blue ones, ever since the gold power tried to use me to get to him. I needed to get out of the village for a while, even if it was only for a few minutes. The closely laid houses and strong stench of livestock were making my head spin. Maybe this trip to the lower kingdom would be good for me, clear my head, making me stop thinking about him. These thoughts, these worries over just a maybe were making my head spin in more ways than one. The entrance gate was two large wooden doors that stood proudly against the corresponding fence. It was built before my time, before the King of the West and his soldiers chased the northern raiders and outlaws from the mountain. Now, we kept it as some form of comfort, mainly against the king himself. He's never hidden the fact that he wasn't particularly fond of any village besides his own. I let out a long sigh. Why was I still pondering this? Why did I even care? It's been a week since the last and first time I ever saw him. If he was so convinced I was his mate, why would he leave me for so long? Why would he give me back to begin with? Why did it even matter? I didn't walk far outside the gates, maybe a few feet, but as soon as I did, I felt the shift in the air, felt that tingle of fear shoot down my spine like a few weeks before. My eyes flickered out across the dark trees and shadows of the thick forest. Wolfborns. I now knew they were real, knew most of the rumors were true, and one of them was watching me. The king was watching me. I froze the minute those strange, electrifying blue eyes caught mine. My breath caught in my throat. What? He blinked and I felt my feet walk closer to the two glowing orbs shining brightly in the darkness on their own. I forced myself to stop at the beginning of the dense, dark trees. "What are you doing here?" My soft voice filled the silent air around us as the snow gently fell from the sky. Those abnormally bright eyes blinked. I watched them carefully with the narrowed brow as he took one step back, then another. I couldn't see the rest of his body through the dark of the woods, but his eyes grew smaller as he edged away from the village. "I'm not going in there," I stated firmly as my gaze washed over the silent trees. I was only brave enough to go in there during the day with Mirer. I had no intention of going in there at night. Those eyes hardened in warning, but I only shook my head. I winced when he let out a low growl, but forced myself to stand my ground. "If you want to talk, come out here." I didn't know why I suddenly felt brave enough to talk like that to him, to the king of the West. Maybe because I knew he was in his wolf form, or maybe because some part of me, deep down, knew he would never hurt me. But whatever it was, it wouldn't let me run back into the safety of the village. He snarled low in his throat and took another step back. I raised my head high, kept my back straight, like that would prove to him I wasn't the scared, frightened little girl I really was. With one last blink, those agonizingly beautiful blue eyes vanished, and I was left staring into the darkness of the northern woods. I sighed. Well, it wasn't the reunion I imagined. Not that I actually thought we would ever see each other again. I slowly started to turn around, ready to head back to the light of the village, when a thick tree branch shot out of nowhere and wrapped around my waist. "What the—" "Be quiet." I froze. That voice. I knew that voice, that tone. It rang like a dark lullaby through my mind, my dreams, and promised a lifetime, a warmth I never knew. I went limp in what I now found was the king's insanely large arm, not a ginormous tree branch, as he gently eased me back into the dark shadows of the trees. "What are you doing?" I gasped as he dragged me in the direction he wanted me to go. The thick grip he had on my waist was leaving me breathless and making me crave things I had never had before. I tried not to make it too obvious that I was leaning back into the strong warmth of his large chest. "You wanted to talk, right?" His voice was gruff, deep, and just as beautiful as the one drifting through my dreams. But the only problem was that I could not remember for the life of me where I had heard it before. Yeah." Before I realized what was happening, that large arm wrapped around my waist lifted me over a large root stuck in the ground like I weighed nothing. He grunted as he stepped over it after me. "God, you're so tiny." He growled under his breath as he pretty much carried me wherever we were going. "No, you're just abnormally large." He turned me towards him just enough to see the appalled look those glowing eyes shot me. It actually brought a small laugh to my lips. All wolfborns are naturally big. He growled as he carried me deeper into the very same forest I told him I wasn't going into. "Yes, the men in your town seemed very large as well, but you are literally the most ginormous person I have ever seen." I tilted my head back enough to blink up at that face hidden in the shadows of the night and tried to give him a small smile as those bright eyes shot me a dark glare. But then I watched in amazement as a small smile touched his own lips. I couldn't tell much from the dark, but that smile alone was beautiful. I'm going to take that as a compliment. I shrugged, even though it was kind of hard to with how he was carrying me. "I told you that I didn't want to go in here," I grumbled instead as the lights from my village faded behind us. I wasn't necessarily sure what was going on or where we were going, but I wasn't afraid. Not like I should be. No normal person would be in the presence of the king. I didn't even know his real name, and I felt like the safest person in the world. "I told you not to be a weakling, and you were coming in one way or another."
He snarled an answer, and I could only gape up at him as he finally pulled us to a stop a good mile or so from the village. The woods stayed eerily silent around us. "You did no such thing," I mumbled, as he set me gingerly, surprisingly, down on my feet. My head barely reached the breadth of his broad chest, a chest so big it was the size of two of me combined. "I'm going to take that as a compliment." I shrugged, even though it was kind of hard to with how he was carrying me. "I told you that I didn't want to go in here," I grumbled instead, as the lights from my village faded behind us. I wasn't necessarily sure what was going on or where we were going, but I wasn't afraid, not like I should be. No normal person would be in the presence of the king. I didn't even know his real name, and I felt like the safest person in the world. "I told you not to be a weakling, and you were coming in one way or another." He snarled an answer, and I could only gape up at him as he finally pulled us to a stop a good mile or so from the village. The woods stayed eerily silent around us. "You did no such thing," I mumbled, as he set me gingerly, surprisingly, down on my feet. My head barely reached the breadth of his broad chest, a chest so big it was the size of two of me combined. "Yes, I did. You just weren't listening." "You are a wolf." "So?" I glared up at his hidden face like he was crazy, but he just gave me an indifferent scoff. "How am I supposed to know what you tried to say when you're a wolf?" "You did just fine the other week." "That was different. You were hurt, and I basically asked you only yes or no questions." He rolled those beautiful eyes at me, but I glared up at him like that glowing gaze just shone down at me in amusement. I huffed and forced mine to glance away. "What are you doing here?" I asked again as the giant man, who the elders apparently thought was my mate, slowly circled the space around me, like a predator, stalking its prey. He was standing too close for comfort, even if my body reacted in strange ways at the proximity. I was curious. His voice was a deep baritone that shook the very fabric of my being. I tried not to let my breath catch in my throat. I could feel those intense, beautiful eyes of his watching me as he continued to walk, like he was assessing every inch of me. It made me fidget uneasily where I stood. It felt like hours when he finally stopped his circling, but only a minute or two had passed. I watched quietly as he stood in front of me, those unearthly eyes locking with mine once again. Just like the other day, we stayed stuck in that soul-gazing stare, a stare that froze my insides and made my stomach tighten in uncertainty, but a beautiful stare nonetheless. We stood silently forever, not touching, not talking, just staring. It was weird how natural it felt to just stand there all day and gaze up at those abnormally gorgeous eyes. "The elders tell me we're mates." I couldn't help my whispered voice from sliding unwelcomed into the silence surrounding the forest, but it didn't break our trance. If anything, I felt like I was drowning further and further into him. Just like his wolf, he blinked and tilted his head curiously to the side. He sure did do that often. "Do you not believe them?" Even though his voice was soft, there was no masking the obvious authority ringing through it. He was completely royal. For the first time since his wolf jumped me, I felt nerves over his being start tugging at my resolve, but I couldn't look away from him. I don't know what to believe," I admitted quietly, and watched from the corner of my eye how his muscles shifted under his skin. I hadn't been that truthful in weeks, months, but there was just something about him that forced the truth from my lips. He rolled his shoulders as if they were tense. "Do you not feel it?" Those bright eyes narrowed in confusion, and I frowned at the small one that creased his brow. It was hard to make out much of his features, but from what I could tell from the faint light of the moon, he was absolutely gorgeous.
His jawline was sharp, his hair was dark, and his eyes glowed brighter than the moon. I feel something, but I don't know what. I finally broke my gaze from that intense stare and glanced out at the dark trees surrounding us. If anything, I was more confused than ever. Our brief encounter in these very woods weeks before replayed constantly in my brain in the lonely hours of the day, and his beautiful voice haunted my dreams. And now these weird feelings turning at the base of my stomach with just one simple touch from the king was only making the confusion 10 times worse. They never told me. I let my voice trail off because I honestly wasn't sure how to approach the topic. It was almost embarrassing to admit how I had no idea about the mechanism behind mates or even what they were. A frown pulled at the features of his face I could see, and I resisted the small pout that wanted to tug on my own. He shouldn't frown. I didn't want him to. Talking about this wasn't making him happy. They never told you about mates? That beautiful, vibration-sending voice of his was gruff in disbelief and what also sounded like anger. My face flushed for some reason beyond me. I know what they are, but they never taught me anything about them or what the signs were. He took a step towards me as that frown once again turned to a look of confusion. My eyes wandered back to the ones that were calling me. Why not? He was getting frustrated now. I could tell, but I could also tell that that frustration wasn't directed at me, and I wasn't sure how. My flushed face turned into an embarrassed blush, and I broke my gaze from his once again. I licked my lips and stared at the bare, ginormous, buff chest just inches in front of me. His skin was toned, tight, and rather tan despite the dark atmosphere of his home on the top of the mountain. It was supposed to be impossible for me to have a mate. I muttered softly as the silent forest surrounding us slowly started to come to life once again. He took a step towards me, and even though my brain told me to step away, the same voice that had gotten me into trouble in the first place told me to stay put. I jumped when his giant palm cupped my chin, an entire jaw, and forced my gaze up to his. Why? For a moment, all I could do was stare up into that intense gaze as the warmth of his giant hand shot through every inch of me. The tingling electric feeling started at the base of my chin and shot through the rest of my body until all I could feel were pins and needles. They said it was only possible for shifters to have mates. I'm not a shifter. He stared at me curiously for a few good seconds before the hand gripping my jaw gently forced my head into the air. I gasped as he lowered his face into my neck and took a deep breath, paused, then took another. He pulled back a minute later, and his bright eyes gleamed down at my shocked ones. "You smell like one." His voice was gruff once again as he relaxed his hold on my jaw. "I lived with them. They raised me. I'm bound to smell like one." Tingles shot straight from his thumb and down my body in a sharp jolt as he rubbed it along my jaw. I couldn't help but lean further into him. I resisted the disapproving groan that clogged my throat as his hand slowly left my chin. "Were your parents not shifters?" My eyes dropped to the ground at his question, and I resisted the urge to tick my jaw. "I don't know. I've never met them. The leader of the town and his family raised me, but they couldn't have been, right? If I can't shift, they shouldn't have been able to either." He shrugged and glanced around the dark woods surrounding us from all sides as if the situation wasn't that big of a deal. "It's not common for some shifters to produce dormant offspring, but it has happened before." Do you think we're mates?" I asked nervously as he reached up and ran that huge hand through hair I couldn't see in the darkness, but oh, how I wished I could. "I know we are." His voice came out in what sounded like a dark growl.
and that made my insides twist almost painfully. I could feel the fear of rejection, of no worth. I couldn't pinpoint the fear, it was just there. And it was so different from my I didn't care attitude of earlier. Do you not want that? My voice came out as weak and small as I felt at that moment. I was only surprised I was able to keep the fear I was feeling from it. This was an odd experience for me, an odd feeling, and I didn't like it, not one bit. What was he doing to me? I never wanted a mate, he grumbled and took a step away from me. Oh, I muttered softly and dropped my eyes to the ground as he continued to glance off to the side of us. I guess I was right about earlier, about why he didn't bring me to his village, his home. He didn't want me. He didn't want a mate. I don't know why I let that hurt me, why I let that knowledge leave a painful hole in the middle of my chest. I lived my whole life believing I would never have a mate, never had that earth-shattering soul connection with someone, and I never let it bother me. Just because I suddenly had one that didn't want me, didn't mean I was going to let it upset me now. I never had any hope in the matter to begin with. I always believed I was strong enough to turn her away, if I actually had one. His voice was dark and low as it softly filled the small space between us. My arms wrapped protectively around my stomach like it was readying it for the rejection it knew was coming. But I couldn't let it bother me. I wouldn't. My men seemed so confident when it came to their mates. They made it seem so natural, like falling in love was as easy as breathing. I figured it would be just as easy to make sure I didn't. He paused for a moment and licked his lips. I really didn't want to stand there and listen to this. As much as I loved listening to his voice, I wished he would just hurry up and get it over with. I no longer wanted to make footprints in the snow or embrace the freezing temperature. I just wanted to curl up in my bed, forget about this whole situation, and move on with my life. I was never supposed to have him anyway. I was wrong, he grumbled softly a moment later. My eyes snapped up to him as he let out a heavy sigh that sounded almost like a groan, his big hands pushing into his closed eyes. A frown tugged at my lips as I watched the inner turmoil pull at his body. I wasn't exactly sure what he was trying to say, but I didn't like the anguish it was causing him. I never meant... No one told me it would feel like this. His words came out in a dark snarl that shot through me like lightning. I'm confused, I muttered into the air around us, but he just let out a tired sigh. I never wanted a mate, ever, until I saw you on top of that roof. I tried to squash the hope that ignited in my chest. Just because he changed his mind didn't mean that our situation would change. He could still push me away, and I still wasn't exactly sure how this was possible. Why did I suddenly want it to be possible? And you want me now? I asked softly as he rubbed a hand down his face, the face that was almost completely hidden in shadow. I don't know what I want, he grumbled, as a fresh wave of snow started falling from the sky and through the bare branches of the mountainous trees. But I do know what I don't want, and I don't want you in my life. His answer only confused me more, and I'm sure he could tell by the small frown that graced my lips. I rubbed my hands along my arms in almost a soothing way. I wasn't sure what to make of the whole situation, what to feel. This is coming out horribly. I'm sorry. I think I was as shocked as he was at the apology. The King of the West was not known to ever apologize or show any remorse or mercy. And I could tell we were both thinking the same thing. That was the first time he had ever said sorry in a very long time, or at all. It's okay. I think I understand.
No, you don't. I can see that you don't. He snarled and took another few frustrated steps back. Mates are weak. They make you weak. Traitors would use you against me. My enemies would threaten to take you from me. My being would be solely focused on protecting you. You, this little, tiny, breakable thing that I could crush with one wrong touch. Hey, I'm not that fragile. I didn't even get to finish my sentence before he flashed in front of me, one large, massive hand clutching at my throat. His beautiful blue eyes were glowing in an anger that appeared so dangerous it should have frightened the living daylights out of me, but it didn't. One squeeze, little girl, and your neck would snap in half. You are dangerously fragile. His voice was a dark growl I had yet to hear, a growl that suggested that creature inside of him was working hard to take over. I gulped as the pressure around my neck tightened, but it wasn't enough to cut off any air. But you won't, I gasped softly and gripped the thick wrist attached to the hand around my throat. You won't squeeze. And I was right. We both knew it. He wouldn't kill me. He could never kill me. This thing between us would never let him. That doesn't lessen my point, he growled in my face as his hand pulled me closer towards him. That I'm a weak, fragile, incompetent being. Yes, I get that. I couldn't hide that small amount of hurt that snuck into my shaking voice. Just because he spoke the truth didn't mean that it didn't hurt. I watched as those beautiful blue eyes softened and his hand eased away from my neck. I never said you were weak and incompetent, little one.
You might as well have, I grumbled as I reached up and rubbed the spot his hand had just left. His presence was so large and fierce that I was almost sure I would feel his phantom touch for a long while to come. His beautiful lips pulled into a small frown once again. You are my mate. Despite your size, I highly doubt you're incompetent. Despite my size, my butt. But I can still be weak, right? My tone was sarcastic, but that didn't stop a smile from tugging on his lips. Physically, yes. I don't think so up here, though. He tapped my forehead gently, and I couldn't help the small smile of my own. Then it slowly faded. So where does that leave this? Whatever this is between us. I gestured between us and sadly watched as his bright eyes dimmed. He slowly reached up with one hand and cupped it around the back of mine that I still held in the air. He wasn't holding my hand, just kind of cupping his palm around its back. My hand looked like that of a small child compared to his. It sent shivers down my spine. There are things I have to deal with, matters I must take care of, before anyone can even learn about you. He muttered softly as his giant hand closed around mine, making both into a gentle fist. He paused and let out a heavy breath as his thumb rubbed against the bottom of my palm. No matter how badly this ache inside of me is telling me to take you back with me, I can't. Not for a long while, at least. I frowned, but stayed silent as he opened our hands again. I'm not in a good position for anyone to know about you. His gruff voice came out in a soft whisper, almost as if he was pleading with me to understand. He didn't have to, though. If he didn't want me to go with him, then I wouldn't put up a fight. I never really planned on anything. Honestly, I was surprised he even told me some part of him actually wanted me. Then what do we do? I asked softly as the warmth from his hand disappeared. I resisted the urge to reach out and grab for it as it dropped to his side. I didn't like him standing so far away. I couldn't feel his warmth. I couldn't stare up into his eyes,
and I couldn't help this feeling of abandonment flowing through me. Will you ever see me again? I was ashamed of the weak-willed whisper that passed my lips. I felt like he could hear all of my fears in that simple statement, but if he did, he didn't comment. His beautiful blue eyes stared holes into my head as I wrapped my arms tight around my stomach and stared at the ground. I don't think I could stay away from you long if I tried. I blushed at the relieved sigh that rushed past my lips. Before I knew what was happening, I was lifted straight off the ground and into his giant, warm chest. At first, I was surprised at the awkward hug, until he forced my legs around his waist and began carrying me. What are you doing? I actually laughed as he stepped over that thick branch from before and began the slow walk back to my village. Carrying you? His tone sounded as much confused as mine did, like he didn't understand why I would even ask. Is this like a wolf-born thing or something? His thick, tree-trunk-like arm rested under me like a chair as his other moved branches out of our path. He grunted and slanted those bright blue eyes at me. Yes, but it is only meant for our mates and the young. Do the underlings not carry their females? Underlings? The look he shot me was one of disbelief, as if it were a completely ridiculous notion that I wouldn't understand these things. It took him a minute to answer. Forgive me, small one. I forget other shifters have different customs and cultures than ours. His arm raised me up higher until I could loosely wrap my arms around his thick neck. Underlings are what we call shifters who are not wolf-born, because they live under the mountain. No, they don't. Some just live at the base of it. He chuckled at the confused look on my face as the lights from the village started flickering ahead once again. I held on tighter to him as we drew closer. I didn't understand the panic that suddenly filled my chest, or this desperate need to cling to him as tightly as I could. I didn't want him to go. We think anyone who does not live at the top of the mountain is under it. It's an old phrase. Oh, I muttered as I tried to discreetly snuggle into the warmth of his chest. No, the underlings don't often carry their mates. Maybe once in a while, but it's more or less for fun. He made a noise in the back of his throat that had me glancing up at him curiously. How odd. He grumbled as he finally stopped walking when we were a few feet from the edge of the forest. He set me carefully down on my feet, and despite the voice in my head nagging at me to never let him go, I reluctantly unwrapped my arms around his neck. Don't forget what I said. Stay in your village until I see you again. His heavy hand was resting on my shoulder, like an older being scolding a child. When will that be? His bright eyes flashed and he glanced away. I'm not sure, but it won't be too terribly long. We have much more to talk about. Do I meet you halfway or something? He chuckled and shook his head. No, I will come here. If I can't leave the village, how will I know you're here? You will know. But the look he shot me with those intoxicating eyes was enough to silence any objections. I slowly closed my mouth and watched as he took a small step towards me. My breath caught in my throat as one giant, thick hand slowly reached up and ran its thumb along the base of my jaw. His bright blue eyes followed the gentle action. Do not worry, my little one. You'll know. I barely had time to process his words, much less his actions, before he turned and retreated back into the dark of the forest. I stood there for who knows how long, silently praying for him to return, secretly wishing beyond all hope to go with him. Chapter 5. Days slowly went by after my encounter with the Ging, long days that gradually turned into even longer weeks. The heavy snow had finally started to fall, and Lennox wanted to leave for the lower kingdom in the next day or two. I was nervous, ridiculously so,
even though I knew I had no reason to be. The King of the West had told me not to leave the town, and our annual trip hadn't even crossed my mind during our entire conversation. But it's been 2 weeks since then, and I haven't seen him. Did I honestly expect to? I knew he said he wouldn't stay away for long, but the look in his eyes suggested otherwise. I wouldn't be surprised if I never saw him again. And that fact hurt. I put on a smile around Mayra, talked to Lennox when he stopped by, but my elder-appointed escort still followed me everywhere, and I walked around the village like one of the dead. But the maddening part was that I couldn't help it. My mind was constantly revolving around him, around his eyes, the warmth of his skin, the strong feeling of his arms. It never gave me a reprieve. I was forced to dream of his voice, replay our encounter in the forest over and over again, like my own soul was taunting me over the fact that we couldn't be. Not yet, at least. That was what the King of the West told me. Not yet. Then when? Mayra would follow the guard and me around occasionally, offering to start a conversation or do something more fun outside the walls. But every time I began to agree, the king's command rang through my head. Stay in your village until I see you again. But I had no idea when that would be, or if I ever would. That night, after my guard had fallen asleep outside my door, I found myself wandering the perimeter of the village. I've done this a couple of times since the encounter in the woods, and I always seemed to teeter on the edge of breaking his command, of stepping just 1 foot out of the village to see what would happen. Would he know? Would he even care? I was never supposed to have him, and he never wanted me. Did we even have a future? I didn't know what this feeling was, this emotional tug pulling me towards his territory, his castle, him. I didn't know how much longer I could obey his demand. All I wanted to do was run back up that mountain and I'm not sure what, but I knew that I needed to see him again. Needed to. And that scared me. Was it me who wanted to be with him so badly, or the gold power? I felt it stir deep within my chest a few times since I met him in the woods, but every time one of the town's healers or elders prodded at me, it disappeared. And it was all I could do to shove it down. I was terrified of the power now, afraid of what it could do to me. It was the middle of the night, and most of the village was sleeping when I finally decided to cross into the forest. It didn't really matter anyway. I've crossed out of the town numerous times before, and no harm had ever found me. Besides sneaking into his town, I doubted any would now. A part of me did fear the northern woods, especially now when I was venturing in on my own. But this was the only time I had to be by myself. My escort would no doubt not let me leave the town, and neither the elders nor Lennox would allow me back into the forest. Holding my resolve and facing my fear was the only way I would be free of that place, even if it were just for a few brief moments. The dark trees and shadows that welcomed me were almost refreshing. Despite my hesitation, I breathed in the fresh air and the cold snow of the mountain. The frigidness filled my chest and came out as a hot breath, but I loved it. I was starting to dread the upcoming trip to the Lower Kingdom for more reasons than one. I found myself tracing the King of the West's phantom footsteps back to the little spot where he had taken me all those days ago. It had barely been 2 weeks, but it felt like a lifetime. I suddenly felt silly for not leaving the town sooner. There was no reason to take his command to heart. The mountain and its base were safe. He kept them safe, even if the underlings were beneath them. Why would he care anyway? My heart skipped a beat as the dark thought flashed across my mind. He pretty much told me he didn't want me, didn't want to mate. The king wanted space between us so that we couldn't grow close, so his enemies wouldn't have a way to hurt him. He wanted me locked up, waiting quietly, so he wouldn't have to deal with me. The odd emotional bundle of chaos in my chest shattered at the notion. The nerves and panic that shot through me were strong enough to stop me in my tracks. I rubbed my fist into my chest to ease the blossoming pain. Then wouldn't it have been easier to reject me? I told him it would be okay, that I never expected to have a mate to begin with. Was this the universe's cruel way of punishing me for something I did in a past life, or my burden for holding the gold power? For the first time in a very long time, I felt pins prick my eyes. This feeling was horrible. I didn't ask for any of this, especially him. My heart stopped when a sudden low growl emitted from the dark tree surrounding me, and I took a step back in fear. That was not a snarl I was familiar with, or one that sent a pleasant feeling down my spine. I blinked rapidly out into the dark shadows of the woods and gasped when a pair of dark golden eyes blinked back at me. The creature's white fangs flashed dangerously in the moonlight. My breath caught in my throat as I took another shaky step back. This was not the King of the West's wolf. Those golden eyes watched my every move, every breath that left my chest. It was unsettling, unnerving. There was nothing good swimming around his irises, and it made my stomach clench in fright. I retreated further and watched as those deep golden eyes narrowed. The growl that sounded from the beast shook me to my very bones. But I got the hint. Stay still. The dark wolf stepped forward, power and authority strumming through its lean body. It might not have been the king, but it was definitely a powerful, high-ranking wolfborn. Its large body stood proudly as its brown fur reflected darkly off the light of the moon. I was so nervous I wanted to throw up. I never felt this much fear around the king, but one other wolfborn, and I feared the very day I was born. Its eyes regarded me carefully as I stood stock still in the middle of the leering dark forest. There was no hope of escape if it wanted to kill me. It might have let me run a little way for the fun of it, but I wouldn't have made it back to the village alive. I watched with wide eyes as the wolf watched me, its dark gaze slowly rolling over my body, like they were judging me, seizing me up. It made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I didn't like it. "What do you want?" My voice sounded foreign with the hesitation ringing through it as I spoke against the silent background of the forest. The wolf's eyes snapped back to mine. I gulped. I wanted to turn and run for my life when its large body began to step out from the darkness of the trees, but I held my ground. I knew if I so much as turned, it would pounce, and my throat would be clutched tightly in its large jaw. The wolf was big, but not quite as large as the King of the West's scary cane. His fur was such a dark, rich brown that it could have easily been mistaken for black, and that golden stare stopped just inches away from my own. The beast was as tall as I was. I gulped. I suppose venturing off on my own wasn't such a good idea. He let out a hot breath of air that hit me straight in the face and made my nose scrunch up at its unpleasantness. I watched as amusement flashed through those dark eyes. Then the beast started to change right in front of me. Fur began to retract, bones began to crack, to shift, and skin soon covered the wolf's body. The shifters in the village all changed so fluently, usually in a jump or leap, but nothing ever this brutal. I was both repulsed at the sound of breaking bone and intrigued by the awe-inspiring sight. It wasn't long before I stood staring at one of the 6 men who sat beside the king on that platform weeks before. A vast, very brooding man. The worst part was that he didn't even try to hide himself.
He stood barely 3 feet in front of me, showing off every inch of his large body, and stared down at me with calculating eyes. I looked everywhere but at him. "Who are you?" I asked, after the silence around us became too deafening, and I doubted he will talk anytime soon. "Tyron, Delta of the Northern Kingdom, and third in command of the Great King. Who are you?" His voice was such a gruff growl that it caused the birds in the trees above to take flight in fear. What I wouldn't have given for wings then, I gulped again as those gold eyes narrowed into a look so dangerous it turned my blood cold. "Emily." I gave him a little wave for good measure, but he only ignored it. I jumped when he suddenly bent forward and started sniffing around my head, like he was checking for some odor I hadn't cleaned away in my daily bath. What are you doing?" "Be quiet, child," he snarled before going back to sniffing at my hair. I tried not to pay too much attention to his actions, though. Tyron pulled back a moment later with a curious look gracing his no longer brooding face. "You smell like him," he mumbled softly as his dark gaze scanned my face curiously. My eyebrows furrowed in confusion. I smell like who?" My eyes widened and I shuddered at the seething look he sent me before taking another unsteady step back. He took one forward. "The Great King. You smell of him." "I do?" I frowned and lifted my hair to smell it myself, but only found the scent of my hair soap. I glanced up at him in confusion. He nodded and his eyes turned thoughtful once again, but he didn't say anything else. I wasn't sure how long he would be content with staring at me strangely, and I was afraid of the repercussions of trying to flee. "What are you doing here? Wolfborns don't come down this far without a reason." My voice trailed off as his eyes went hard once again. "That is none of your concern." His voice was an icy blade that cut easily through my resolve, and I took a quick step back as that cold demeanor once again fell over him. "Go now, halfling, before I change my mind." And without another word, he leapt into the air and shifted once again back into that terrifying wolf. I ran back to the village. "Emily, are you even listening to me?" I blinked over at Myra's older brother in a daze as his dark eyes glared over at me. "Huh?" I mumbled as he slammed his bag shut and threw it on his single bed. Our home was bigger than most in the village, but the rooms were still awfully tiny and barely had room for a large bed. Even Lennox, the town's leader, had a relatively small living space. "You can't keep tuning everyone out, kid. I'm starting to worry." "You're always worrying," I said with a heavy sigh, and finally dropped my feet from the window seat to turn to him. "But I know. I'm sorry. I've just been thinking a lot lately." "Indeed." I shrugged at the look he shot me before staring back out at the snow falling from the sky. It was the evening after my little run-in with the Great King's third in command, and my mind was still reeling from the encounter. What had he been doing there? Snooping around, looking for his next meal? But then the darker thoughts crept in, like, did the king send him to watch me, to stalk me, to kill me? And then I would tell myself those were ridiculous theories, and if he wanted me dead, he would have done it himself a long time ago. I was only being dumb and naive. Just because he didn't want me with him didn't mean he wanted me dead. "We're leaving tomorrow morning. Are you even packed yet?" I smiled guiltily at him as he threw another bag on his bed. "I didn't think so," he grumbled as I played with the rug underneath my feet. "Do I have to go?" I mumbled as the cold of the glass window pressed into my back. Leaving the village again for so long was not the best idea. I already went once, and that didn't have the best result. Leaving the whole mountain for the winter, much less the village, without telling the king was not a good idea. Then again, he wouldn't even know. Probably wouldn't even care. Maybe getting away from those elders and their stupid examinations would be a nice change. "Yes, you have to go. We've already had this discussion." I know, I'm sorry. I'll go pack." I groaned as I stood off the window seat with a heavy groan. The smile he shot me was more than enough to make me forget the stiff ache in my bones. He was the father figure I never had. Making him proud always made my heart soar. "Thank you, little cub. I will see you in the morning." "Good night," I grumbled over my shoulder and shot him a wave before retreating to my own room, my escort following silently behind me. The older guard never spoke, to me at least, and he always stayed 3 or 4 paces behind. I could initiate a conversation first, but I would rather not talk to the person who ensured my freedom was short-lived. It didn't take long to pack what I usually needed for these annual trips, and since most of my clothing was made for northern weather, I had very little that would be sufficient for the lower kingdom. Yet, I always seemed to manage. It was late when I finally went to lie down for the night, the bright light of the full moon glowing serenely into my room, but I paused before reaching to blow out the candle. We would be gone for 2 moons at least, and I couldn't ignore that nagging feeling in my chest any longer. I couldn't leave in the morning without telling the king somehow. I sighed and opened the drawer of the nightstand at the side of my bed. Even if he didn't care, I couldn't just leave. I grabbed a piece of paper and a charcoal stick from the drawer and wrote a quick note. No one would deliver this to his territory. No one dared cross into his land as I had, and I wasn't going back there anytime soon. I slipped on my snowshoes and checked to make sure the guard was sleeping outside my door before slipping out into the cool night air. This was the least I could do, and it wouldn't harm anyone. Even if the king never saw the note or never came down again, I would feel better knowing I had tried. I didn't bother taking my time to enjoy the snow or the cool night air as I exited the village's gates and headed into the dark of the forest. The phantom path the king had taken me down all those nights before was etched into my mind, and I reached the spot sooner than expected. I paused for a moment and breathed in the refreshing air. I wished I could see him again before we left, see those lightning eyes that made my heart race. He said he couldn't stay away for long, but was 2 weeks not long enough? And now I would be gone all winter. I was starting to doubt I would ever see him again, highly, and the knowledge made my heart ache. I let out a heavy sigh that turned into fog in the freezing air as I turned to the nearest tree. If he did care and did find the note, at least I knew he wouldn't wonder where I had run off to. I reached for the string I placed in the cover's pocket and leaned up to tie the note tightly around the trunk. There, at least my part was done. I didn't even know his name. That was all I could think of as I started the cold, lonely walk back to the town. I was hung up on him and I didn't even know his name. Was this how the rest of my life would be? I wonder if I will see him again and if we will ever be together. I didn't even know his name.
Chapter 6. The next morning was cold and dark. A few guards from the village helped Lennox, Mara, and me down to the docks, but didn't stay long. The ship that waited patiently in the water once belonged to their parents, but after their death, Lennox sold it to a family of merchants who traded around the ocean at the base of the mountain. They were kind enough to give us passage to the lower kingdom every year. "We have a few minutes to spare if you and Mara want to walk around the shops," Lennox announced after he and the guards finished loading our bags. I shot him a smile. "By ourselves?" The guards had dispersed a few minutes before, and I was more than excited for my much-awaited freedom. He rolled his eyes before letting their dark gaze land on me. "Yes, only for a minute or two. Be back shortly." "Thanks, Lennox," Mara cheered before grabbing onto my hand and leading me over to the shops along the shorefront that were just now opening for the day. He laughed softly after us. "This is so exciting," she practically squealed as we walked along the displays sitting in front of the stores. "I just love going to the lower kingdom, don't you? I hate the snow. It's always so cold and wet." "Ow!" I stuttered when a large, cloaked figure suddenly bumped against my side.
It was too early in the morning for the coastal villagers to be out and about, and there was more than enough room on the streets. There was no reason for someone to be that rude and walk so close to me. I grasped at my shoulder and snapped my gaze over to the culprit. "Forgive me, my lady." It was a male voice, one masked by the heavy hood that blocked the stranger's face from view. I nodded as he gave me a soft bow before turning around and heading quickly in the opposite direction. How odd. "Emily? Are you okay?" Mira asked worriedly as I rubbed absent-mindedly at my arm. "Yeah, he just sort of surprised me." A flash of blue and a strong tug in my chest caused my breath to catch in my throat before the man disappeared around a corner and into the thick morning fog. My eyes widened. I'll be right back." I breathed out heavily before leaving Mara staring dumbfoundedly after me. I followed the path of the cloaked stranger, the one who shot lightning blue eyes at me right before he turned. Perhaps I was just seeing things I desperately wish were there, but that part of me that seemed tied to the king was begging me to find out. There was no one there when I turned the corner, just a dark alley that led to a dead end. I frowned. I could have sworn I saw the man turn down here. I sighed and turned around. Great. Now my mind was making up fabrications about him. I was never going to be able to get him out of my head. I gasped when the cloaked figure from before suddenly flashed in front of me and gently forced me back into the alley. Yes, gently. "Hey!" A pair of blue eyes so bright they shone against the darkness of the morning caused my voice to freeze in the air. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. All I could do was stare up at him, at those eyes, in a daze like before. We stood there silently for a few moments, like we always seemed to do before anything really happened. The king blinked down at me, and despite the electricity surging through my veins at the sight of him, a thin shred of fear shone as well. His eyes turned dark. "I saw your note." That voice. I knew it was his. I knew it belonged to him, but hearing it outside of my dreams tore at my heart in so many disastrous ways. I didn't know if I would see you again before we left. His eyes glanced away as he seemed to huddle further into the dark cloak. I frowned. He never broke eye contact with me first, never really tried to hide them from me. I felt an odd, unfamiliar ache fill my chest. "You were the one who bumped into me." "I needed to get your attention discreetly." It was silent between us for a few long, rather unpleasant seconds after that. The silences from before were never this tense, this awkward. I enjoyed staring at his eyes silently, and he seemed to do the same with mine. This time, though, he seemed disappointed. "You left the village." He spoke a moment later, and I didn't miss the dark, unhappy tone in his voice. "I had to. You saw the note?" "Before today. You went out to place the note, and you went out the day before after I specifically told you not to." His voice came out as a low, dark growl that didn't hide how displeased he was with me at that moment. I frowned and pressed my hand flat against my stomach, like that would help the unpleasantness settling there. He was upset with me. "Are you mad at me?" My voice was soft and unsure as I blinked up at him, but he kept those beautiful eyes and glanced away. "Yes." My heart dropped painfully in my chest, and I sucked in a ragged breath. "Because I left the village?" Of course, that's why he was mad at me. But it was like my moronic brain needed confirmation anyway, required to know for sure so I could reprimand myself for it later. He was mad at me. He grunted before finally bringing those spellbinding eyes back to mine. Our gazes locked again, as his ginormous body loomed ominously over my smaller one. "Yes." He growled again as that bright gaze flashed. We stood there quietly for a while more, both of us gazing at the other. It felt like years before his eyes softened and his gloved hand slowly reached up to my hair. "Tell me why you disobeyed." His command was soft as his silk-covered fingers played gently with the strand of my hair, his soul-shaking eyes following the action. But I knew he was silently demanding the answer. I wanted to close my eyes when he brushed that very same hand softly along my jaw, but I couldn't. His eyes wouldn't let me. "Did that Delpha or whatever guy tell you?" I asked with a tilt to my head as that hand brushed my hair over my shoulder. I enjoyed those little touches, enjoyed how his eyes followed the actions. I never wanted him to stop. "Delta, and yes, that's his job." "It's his job to tell me when I leave the village?" I frowned up at him, but those blue eyes only narrowed. "It's his job to do whatever I tell him." "So, yes?" He clenched his jaw but kept that gaze on mine as his fingers gripped a hold of my chin. My breath caught in my throat as he leaned my face towards his. "Yes." "Why?" "To keep an eye on you." "But why?" "You are my mate. Of course I'm going to have people watching you." He growled and let go of my chin to clench his fist at his side. I frowned at the action. "You said you didn't want anyone to know about me." "My generals are the exception." "Why?" His dark growls suddenly filled the dark alley where we were hidden, and his blue eyes flashed dangerously. "Stop asking that. It's annoying." I snapped my mouth shut and looked away as he leaned heavily against the brick building beside us. He wasn't wrong. I was just beyond curious about what went on in that beautiful hidden head of his. "I'm sorry." I breathed out into the freezing air surrounding us. He let out a heavy sigh. "Don't be. I shouldn't have snapped at you. I'm just not used to letting people ask so many questions." I gulped as those bright eyes stared holes into the side of my face. I couldn't bring myself to look up at him, at that captivating gaze that held me hostage for seemingly days on end. I couldn't believe I honestly let myself talk so freely around him. Sure, he thought I was his mate, and who knows, maybe I really was. But that didn't permit me to talk to him like he wasn't what he was, a king. The king. "Little one." He started softly as that gloved hand reached up and rubbed gently over my cheek. I tried not to push my face into his touch and hold him there forever, but it was honestly quite hard. "I am truly sorry. Don't be upset with me." Don't be upset with him? The king of the West? This situation was more than odd. "I trust my generals, with my life and with yours. Otherwise, they wouldn't be my generals. They are the only ones who know." I could only nod as his gloved fingers brushed gently over my cheek. "Your note said you are going to the lower kingdom," he started softly as his hand dropped down to his side once more. I tried not to frown in disappointment. I thoroughly enjoyed his warm touch, even if it was through a glove. "You failed to mention how long." My eyes flickered to his. Would he really care how long I would be gone? The look in his bright orbs said he did, but did it honestly matter? How did he come by the note so fast anyway? Had he finally come down the mountain the night before to see me? Or did his general bring it to him? "We leave for the lower kingdom every year, usually for a few moons at least, until the heavy snow fades." I watched as that dark look washed over his bright eyes once again, and he rubbed at the hood hiding his face. "Until winter ends." His voice came out as a low grumble as it flowed easily over my shoulders. I wanted to close the few inches separating us and bury into the no doubt thick and warm lapels of his cloak.
Then a whole new wave of sadness washed over me. Until winter ends, I wouldn't see him again until winter ended. Before, I had been worried about him wanting to see me again, and now I was genuinely starting to fear the fact that I wouldn't for the next 2 or 3 moons. I cannot allow it. What? I asked in surprise and blinked up at him with wide eyes. "I cannot allow you to leave. You shouldn't even be outside of your village right now.
The soft ease in his voice was gone and replaced with a dangerous growl as that gloved hand of his suddenly gripped onto the top of my arm. I don't have a choice, I whispered as his grip tightened and his eyes flashed. No, you don't. You're going back now. No, I don't have a choice but to stay. Lennox is my guardian, and he says we must go. I tried to tug my arm out of his grasp, even though I didn't want to. I enjoyed the way the warmth of his hand surged through the glove and into my skin. His grip tightened. I'm your king and your mate. You do what I say. You don't want me, I snapped as my temper spiked and his grip loosened enough for me to tear my arm free. I dropped my eyes as his widened. You don't. And until that changes, I have to listen to Lennox. Besides, I can't stay there anymore. All I do is sit through examination after examination as they poke and prod at me and force me to drink those funny-colored medications. I need a break from it all. I tried to give him a reassuring smile, but I still couldn't meet his eyes, which I was sure were dimmed in a frown. What are they doing to you? The dark snarl in his voice surprised me, and the firm grip he suddenly held on my chin forced my eyes up to his. I shuddered at the dangerous look passing through his gaze, one that made my stomach twist in almost fear. I gulped. They don't know why the gold power tried to kill me, why it wants you so much, so they keep testing me to see. It wants me because you want me. Do those underlings have no idea how the concept of mates or power works? I'll burn them all. He snarls and his blue eyes flashed as he began to turn away from me, but I gripped onto his arm before he could. No, don't! They're just scared. They don't know what's wrong with me and they are worried for their safety. Don't blame them for their fear. I will blame them for hurting you, he growled, and the sharp fangs of his wolf flashed, but he didn't rip his arm from my grip like I half expected him to. I eased it closer to my body. His eyes were dark in anger as they glanced over me, and even though the angry king was rather frightening, my heart soared at how he wanted to defend me. I gave him a small smile. They haven't hurt me, just made me very uncomfortable. I'm okay, I promise. I was practically hugging his arm by then, but he didn't seem to mind. He even took a closer step towards me. There is nothing wrong with you, little underling. I watched as the anger slowly faded from his lightning eyes. All I could do was stare in wonder. Mate or not, eyes like that shouldn't exist. But the power is magic formed in souls of worth. How ignorant is your culture? The question was rhetorical, and he rolled his eyes as I slowly let go of his arm. Emily, where are you? Myra's voice called from the fog of the street, and I jumped when it reached my ears. The king raised an eyebrow at me. Your name is Emily? There was a small smile pulling at his lips as my eyes flickered between him and the foggy street my friend was looking for me on. Yes. Did your general not tell you that? I asked hesitantly and fidgeted with my hands as Myra called again. No, he failed to mention that. His voice was a dark grumble as his gaze flickered behind me. That's my friend. I should probably go before they start to worry. No. His voice shook through me as his large hand reached out and gripped my upper arm once again. I stared up at him with wide, pleading eyes, but his never wavered. But I have to. Alone. I don't want you leaving alone. I will talk to this Lennox of yours and have one of my generals go with you. My heart dropped to my stomach in disappointment. For a moment there, just a moment, I thought he was going to go with me, but of course he wasn't. He was a king, the king of the West. He had more important matters to deal with than following some silly girl around the lower kingdom all winter. All right. I nodded reluctantly as he let go of my arm and began to turn. You know, I called after him, and watched as he slowly turned back to me with questioning eyes. "I don't even know your name." The light in his eyes slowly faded, and he tore his beautiful gaze away from mine. "That is for the best." His voice was dark once again as it filled the alley surrounding us. I frowned as his gaze glanced back down the street. Myra was still looking for me. "How was not knowing your name for the best? I swear I won't go running down the mountain screaming it to whoever passes by." The corners of his mouth twitched up at that, and he let his beautiful eyes glance back over to me. "I cannot tell you my real name for your safety, not because I don't want to, but," I urged hopefully as his blue eyes flickered around carefully, "my counsel calls me West." I raised an incredulous eyebrow in him, but he just lowered his in confusion. "West?" "Yes." "Your own counsel doesn't even know your real name?" "It hasn't been necessary." "I'm not calling you that." He crossed those beautiful thick arms over his chest with a scoff. "Then call me King."
Yes. Did your general not tell you that?" I asked hesitantly, and fidgeted with my hands as Myra called again. "No, he failed to mention that." His voice was a dark grumble as his gaze flickered behind me. "That's my friend. I should probably go before they start to worry." "No." His voice shook through me as his large hand reached out and gripped my upper arm once again. "I was serious before. I don't want you leaving." I stared up at him with wide, pleading eyes, but his never wavered. "But I have to—" "Alone. I don't want you leaving alone. I will talk to this Lennox of yours and have one of my generals go with you." My heart dropped to my stomach in disappointment. For a moment there, just a moment, I thought he was going to go with me. But of course he wasn't. He was a king, the king of the West. He had more important matters to deal with than following some silly girl around the lower kingdom all winter. "All right," I nodded reluctantly as he let go of my arm and began to turn. "You know," I called after him and watched as he slowly turned back to me with questioning eyes. "I don't even know your name." The light in his eyes slowly faded and he tore his beautiful gaze away from mine. "That is for the best." His voice was dark once again as it filled the alley surrounding us. I frowned as his gaze glanced back down the street. Myra was still looking for me. "How is not knowing your name for the best? I swear I won't go running down the mountain screaming it to whoever passes by." The corners of his mouth twitched up at that, and he let his beautiful eyes glance back over to me. You raised one dark, beautiful eyebrow at that, and I found myself blushing as he brought his full attention back to me. "I cannot tell you my real name for your safety, not because I don't want to. But," I urged hopefully as his blue eyes flickered around carefully, "my counsel calls me West." I raised an incredulous eyebrow at him, but he just lowered his in confusion. "West?" "Yes." "Your own counsel doesn't even know your real name?" "It hasn't been necessary." "I'm not calling you that." He crossed those beautiful thick arms over his chest with a scoff. "Then call me King." I think I deserve a name to call you by other than your title. Any name. It doesn't even have to be your first, as long as it's not West. I murmured against the silence surrounding us. He grunted, and his bright eyes turned amused as they stared down at me curiously. "You think you get special treatment because you're my mate?" His tone would have suggested otherwise, but just by the few things he'd slipped out about his culture and the way he's acted around me so far, I could tell mates were more than sacred to his kind. "Yes." His eyes flashed darkly for a moment and his face turned serious before he walked slowly back over to me. I stiffened as he leaned down until his mouth was nearly pressed against my ear, like he was afraid the ghosts in the alley would hear. Eric, King forever. How convenient. Is that your first name? I asked softly as he slowly pulled away from me, his full lips just barely touching my cheek. I gasped as the light touch sent electricity straight through my body. He let out another dark chuckle. No, but it's as close to one that you are getting. I tried not to let the frown tugging on my lips dampen my whole mood, and his dark chuckle gently eased the tension on my shoulders. Run along to your little friend while I find that boy I gave you back on the mountain. I assume that is Lennox, yes? I nodded as he turned again and headed once more for the street. I followed slowly after him until I reached the alley's entrance and saw Mara searching for me at the end of the road. And Emily? My heart jumped as my name passed his lips. That voice alone was enough to make my head spin. But when he used it to say my name, it made everything in me freeze. I glanced back over at him with questioning eyes. The lightning blue of his eyes flashed as he stared over at me in a dark gaze. Don't ever think that I don't want you. My breathing ceased at his words, and all I could do was stare at him with wide eyes as he turned on his heel and headed for the ship waiting for us at the docks. Then take me with you. But he wouldn't, and I doubted he ever would.
Chapter 7. My lady. I stared wide-eyed up at the rather large wolf-born bowing to me at the top of the boat's ramp, his golden eyes sparking in the morning sun. My gaze narrowed. You are the general escorting us in the lower kingdom? Tyrant's face darkened as he rose to his full and rather intimidating height, but refrained from saying the insulting comments I saw flickering through his eyes. I will be escorting you through the lower kingdom. I care little for what your friends do. I frowned at his statement, but didn't bother answering, as Lennox walked over to our little entourage, a rather unpleasant look settling over his face. Emily, may I talk to you? There wasn't exactly anger flashing through his dark gaze, but I could tell he was more than uncomfortable with the newest member of our little party. I gave him a sheepish smile before nodding and walking down the ship's deck. I had a vague idea about what he wanted to talk about, and I wasn't all too thrilled about it. Any idea of privacy between Lennox and me was squashed as the large wolf-born followed closely behind us. Lennox's temper spiked. Alone, General. I would like to speak with my charge alone. Tyron remained still as stone, his golden eyes locked with Lennox's. No. I rolled my own. I have strict orders not to leave Lady Emily's side. Lady Emily? Well, that's a new one. I'm her guardian. I won't hurt her. Lennox's voice held a touch of disbelief and hurt, like the mere presence of the king's general was an open insult to him. For all we know, it probably does. Tyron's resolve did not waver. I do not disobey my king. The large wolf-born did not appear to be backing down anytime soon, and the hard and motionless look in his dark eyes did not disappear. I sighed and turned back towards Lennox, a reassuring smile tugging on my lips. It's okay, Lennox. Just pretend he's not there. I ignored the dark look Tyron shot at me and turned my back on him as the town's leader's brown eyes glanced down to mine. This is a private matter, Emily. I will wait until we have a moment in peace. He shot a pointed look at my new personal guard before flickering his gaze back to mine. My lips pulled into a small frown. What little freedom I was so looking forward to, I knew I could no longer have. The guards from the village were gone, only to be replaced by a wolf-born twice the size of any normal shifter man. I let out a small huff before forcing a soft smile on my lips. All right. When will we be leaving? A minute or two, as soon as I tell the captain we are ready. I nodded and glanced over my shoulder at the king's general, that ever-present emotionless mask set sternly over his face. Then I will be below deck, in my room. Is it the same as last year? Lennox gave me a short nod, which I returned before heading for the hidden stairwell at the back of the ship. It was at least a week's worth of voyage to the lower kingdom, and that was only if the sea was met with smooth waters and fast winds. I would not be surprised if we were sailing for just under 2 weeks. I could already feel the depressed tug in my chest as I strolled below the ship's main deck, Tyron following only a few steps behind. I always missed the mountain whenever we were away. Missed the trees, the wind, the smell of freshly laid snow and rain. And now my heart ached for more than all the old reasons. Now it ached for him. I will take the room next to yours, my lady, Tyron announced as I turned toward the door halfway down the ship's second level. There were 4 in total. The first was the upper deck, the second was the traveler quarters, the third was for the ship's workers, and the fourth held the food and other storage needs. That's Myra's room, I argued and turned slightly wide eyes on the large wolfborn. He raised a dark eyebrow at me. I don't care. This is where I will be staying. I could only blink up at him in surprise as he nudged open the small door with his large shoulder and chucked the bag slung across his other shoulder into the small room. I gaped over at him. How rude. Are all wolfborns so stubborn? No, not the king. At least I didn't think he was. Get settled while you can, Lady Emily. I suspect this journey will be unpleasant for both of us. Tyron grumbled as he ducked low to step into the tiny room, his golden eyes flashing darkly in the dim light. I blinked at the spot he had disappeared from, even after he closed the door. Well, wasn't he a joy? Maybe the king didn't care for my well-being at all. Maybe sending Tyron to be at my side constantly was my punishment for disobeying his direct command. Dear Lord, this was going to be a long journey. I let out a heavy sigh before stepping into the dimly lit room I usually occupied on these trips. It was the same as I remembered, a small room with a tiny cot and a desk with a wash bowl on the side. My luggage rested at the end of the bed, and besides the flickering candle sitting beside the bowl, the only light in the room shone in through the small window above the cot. This was going to be the only place for freedom I was sure to get this entire voyage. How perfect. Why did you not tell me you had been in contact with the king? Lennox's voice was a hushed whisper as his brown eyes flickered over to the large general waiting in line behind the ship's crew for the end of the day meal. A disgruntled look stuck on his surprisingly handsome face. I smiled apologetically over at Myra's older brother as he leaned over his bowl, his dark eyes hard. I did not cross my mind, I answered softly, as my fingers played absently with the small wooden spoon. His eyes flashed darkly, his grip on his spoon tightening.
It didn't cross your mind? He hissed as his temper flared. I dropped my eyes to the meek mushroom soup filling my bowl. I didn't have much of an appetite, especially since Lennox seemed rather mad at me. It didn't cross your mind to tell me that you've been in conversation with the king of the West? I could only shrug as his dark eyes stared holes into the top of my head. It honestly hadn't, but that wasn't the only reason. My talks with the king, if you could call them that, were personal, sacred. It was like a deep, treasured secret I wanted to share with only him. They were special to me, regardless of what the king felt about them. They were the only times I had ever seen him, the only pieces of him I could hold close to my heart. Good Lord. And there goes my doubt that what he and the elders claim is true. I was never supposed to have had him, and my heart knew that, but it was betraying me now. It was clinging on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, I was supposed to have him, supposed to be his mate. I glanced over to the large, boulder-like sized wolfborn, just now getting his evening meal. He would be the only reminder of the king for weeks, for moons. I froze when Tyran's eyes flickered up and locked with mine, their golden glow flashing what looked like a bright blue in the dim light of the fourth deck, before he blinked and they returned to normal. My own widened before I swallowed and glanced away nervously. Did that? No, that wasn't possible. I'm sure it wasn't. For a moment there, I could have sworn I was looking into the eyes of the king. My chest ached painfully. Hello? Are you even paying attention to me? I blinked up at a rather angry-looking Lennox before giving him an apologetic smile. Sorry, Lennox. I'm not feeling so good. Do you mind if I go to bed a little early? I asked softly as he leaned back on the bench, his brown eyes flashing in the candlelight. He let out a heavy sigh before running his hand down his face. Yes, that's fine, Emily. We will talk more tomorrow. I nodded and rose slowly to my feet as Tyran finally reached the table, his golden eyes narrowing almost dangerously. Where are you going? He didn't even bother sitting down at the bench table with Mayera and Lennox as I turned toward him, my brow furrowed. Back to my room. I'm not feeling too well. The general frowned, and his eyes dropped to the relatively small bowl in his hands before he let out a heavy sigh. All right, he grumbled and set the untouched soup down on the table. Let's go. What? No, you need to eat, I stammered as his large body loomed close to mine, one of his dark eyebrows raised in question. I will eat tomorrow. Don't leave on my behalf. If you're hungry, please eat. I nodded towards the table where his untouched bowl sat and wrung my hands nervously in front of me. His gaze narrowed as those golden eyes flashed. If you leave, then I must as well. I opened my mouth to protest again, but he was already bending down and picking up the soup bowl before I could. I will eat this in my room if that will ease your mind, my lady. I gave him a soft smile and a nod before turning and heading for the stairs. I just wanted to be alone, honestly, to close my eyes and think about nothing in particular, but I knew that wouldn't happen. Every time my mind wasn't occupied, it was filled with him. Images of his gorgeous face, soft lullabies of his unearthly voice, hauntings of those gorgeous eyes shining down at me brightly, eyes I could have sworn were glancing over at me through those of Tyran's. I let out a tired sigh. My mind truly was fabricating images of him, anything to make me feel that he was somehow nearby. Sleep well, Lady Emily. The general nodded down at me, his eyes soft for once, as he opened the door to his room. And you, General. His lips twitched up in almost a smirk at that, his dark eyes flashing in the fading light as I slipped into my room and shut the door. I let out a heavy breath. Maybe, just maybe, we could get along on this journey. At sea, the days lulled slowly, and the interactions between Tyran and me were short and blunted bust. His attitude towards me always seemed to change from one conversation to the next. At times, he would be almost pleasant, while at others, he made no mistake to mask the distaste he felt for me. It sent my mind through more loops than I could count. All I could really do was go with the flow and hope the next talk would be better than the last. Mara and I knew every corner of the ship, but for some reason, I always seemed to find something new in my boredom. The voyages to the Lower Kingdom used to always excite me, but with my large and rather intimidating new escort following me everywhere, it was uncomfortable. I was surprised on the 5th day of our journey to wake up and not find Tyran waiting for me outside my door. He always seemed to be awake hours before I was and waiting impatiently outside my room every morning. That was one certain thing about him I could count on. I knocked gently on the thin slab of wood separating his room from the hall, but received no reply. I frowned. It wasn't like him to leave my side or the close vicinity around me. A small smile quickly replaced the frown on my lips. Perhaps he was starting to loosen up and give me room to breathe. I found him leaning against the railing of the top deck, a small book in his large hands, and his body casual as he thumbed through the pages. My lips quirked up at the sight. How odd. Reading seemed like such an underling pleasure. I was surprised to see the mighty wolf-born general with a book.
"What are you reading?" I asked the large male nonchalantly as I leaned beside him on the rail. His golden eyes flickered down at me in surprise before he snapped the book shut. I raised an eyebrow at the quick action. "My lady, you are up early." He gave me a small bow, barely a tilt of his shoulders, before he rose again. "Looks like this conversation would be one of the pleasant ones." I couldn't sleep any longer. "I was surprised you were not at my door, though," I admitted softly as I turned to look out on the beautiful blue view of the middle ocean. "I was not expecting you to rise for another hour." His voice was a dark grumble as it fills the quiet morning air around us. My lips quirked up at the corner. "What happened to not leaving my side?" I teased as he turned to follow my gaze, the book held tightly in his hidden hand. "What the king does not know can't hurt him, or me for that matter." He added the last part as a dark grumble under his breath, but it pulled a quiet laugh from me nonetheless. "If that is your mentality, then why bother following his orders at all?" He shot me a shadowy glance with those gold eyes before flicking his gaze out to the water. "He is my king. Disobeying for an hour is beyond disrespectful on its own. I would never disregard him completely." His voice was filled with such a strong passion that it pulled on the ever-present ache in my chest. I wonder what kind of person the king was to receive such a loyal general and friend. I wrung my hands together as the image of those lightning blue eyes flashed through my mind. "What is he like? The king, I mean?" I asked softly as a small smile tried tugging at my lips at the mere mention of him. All I knew of Eric was the rumors that circled around his being, and the 2 brief interactions between us. And yet I felt like a giddy schoolgirl at the simple thought of those gorgeous lightning blue eyes. "He is a great king, a great man," Tyron answered without hesitation, the pride evident in his voice. "He cares for his people and would sacrifice everything to ensure their safety." My smile slowly fell. "Everything," I muttered softly, my eyes glancing out at the crashing waves in the distance. What exactly did everything entitle? The villages he was supposed to rule? Those under the mountain? Me? The thought caused a painful ache in my chest, one I tried to shove away. I would not be surprised if he were to sacrifice me to save his people, the Wolfborns. Mate or not, I was just a girl, just some stupid, silly girl he barely knew or cared for, so it would seem. I didn't know him, he didn't know me. I can't imagine it would be very hard to choose between that and his people. I could feel Tyron's dark eyes gazing curiously over at me. "Does he care for the people that he does not consider his?" I asked softly as the large ship moved with the steady waves. "He cares for the mountain and protects the shifter villages under it to ensure the safety of his kingdom." "But we are a part of his kingdom. You are not wolves, and some of you aren't even shifters." I flinched at his words, at the harsh bite in his tone as he shot me a pointed look. "I guess the pleasantries were over. You should be eternally grateful that he even allows you to live below the mountain." His golden eyes were dark in distaste, his words like a sharp knife as they cut through the ocean air. "Do all Wolfborn share your feelings?" I muttered as he turned away from me, his dark eyes like icy daggers on my skin. He scoffed. "It is not hatred. It is annoyance. You and the other underlings prance around his kingdom like you belong there, like you own it, when it is by his kindness that you are even allowed to live there. Hell, it's not even a kindness." He let out a harsh bark of laughter that made me edge uneasily away from him.
This whole conversation was rather frightening, honestly. If the mountain were to be attacked, the underlings would be hit first and give us time to respond. You are all a safety precaution to ensure the well-being of our lives. I turned on my heels to hurry away from him, unwanted tears filling my eyes. How horrible this beast was. Did he have no care for how this would make me feel? Of course he didn't. Why would he? I was just a disgrace to him and his people, to his king. I wasn't even a shifter. He probably didn't even believe I was truly the king's mate. Hell, I wasn't even believing it anymore. Wait, my lady. His voice was rimming with distaste as it forced my hurried retreat to stop. I turned on him with angry eyes. What could you possibly say to make this any worse? I snapped at the general who was walking over to me with twisted amusement flickering behind his gold eyes. Their bright taunting only reminded me of the gold power and how it would kill me to get to the king. The king wanted me to give you this. His voice was hard as he threw that book he was looking at early out in the air between us. His eyes glowed in loathing. I reached out with a trembling hand and gingerly took it from his large hands. There was only a gold-encrusted symbol on the cover, one of a wolf howling. I ran my fingers over it gently. He expects you to read it, but do not repeat what you learned to anyone besides a wolf, or you will suffer the consequences. There was no mistaking the warning in his voice or the dark promise in his eyes before he turned and stalked over to the doors leading below deck. I held the book tightly in my trembling hands. I didn't even want to look at the thing, much less touch it. I didn't want to think about what was so important between the pages that would cause such dire consequences to fall over me. And after that fun little conversation with his general, I wouldn't put it past him to carry them out himself. Perhaps I was wrong about him not being capable of hurting me, of killing me. I walked over to the ship's edge, ready to throw the disastrous reading material into the dark, deep water, but paused. This book could hold all the information about the Wolfborns that I ever wanted to know. Their ceremonies, their customs, their king. I brought the book closer to my chest and ran my fingers over the gold symbol again. Perhaps it would be more than just the history of his people. Maybe it would be the history of him. I turned from the railing and walked slowly back to the staircase leading to the guest chambers, the book clutched tightly to my chest. Whether or not what Tyron said was true, that didn't stop me from wanting to learn more about the King of the West and his people. I spent my days just dreaming about their history long before I even dared sneak into their territory. I did not know what us underlings did to warrant such distaste from Tyron, or what I did for him to act so cold, but I would not let that dampen my need to learn, or those two small, sacred memories I held of the king and I. I let out a soft sigh as I opened the door to my room and slipped back inside. I would just spend the day reading the odd little book and reassuring myself that I would not tell anyone. I did not know what the consequences were that the general spoke of, but I did see that I didn't want to find out anytime soon.
Chapter 8. I hadn't realized how many hours slipped by until the sky outside my little window started to darken. I was right about the little book Tyron had given me. It was filled with the customs and traditions of the Wolfborns, of their origins and their myths, how they believed that the very first northern king was the reincarnation of their god Adrax, their god of the night and everything that entails. And every king after held a part of Adrax's soul. It was fascinating, beyond fascinating. I had spent hours reading, and I wasn't even halfway through the book. There was still so much more to learn. My only regret was that Eric wasn't teaching me himself. I jumped in surprise at the soft knock that sounded on my door and glanced at my little window to see that the sun had finally fallen behind the dark water. I had spoken to Lennox earlier in the day, and Mayra had already told me she was turning in for the night. Tyron was the only other one who really had any need to come see me, but after our lovely conversation that morning, I doubted he wanted to see me anytime soon. What is it? My voice didn't hide how startled I was, and I pushed my closed fist against my chest to help slow my rapidly pounding heart. Lady Emily, Oh, great. It was the overbearing Wolfborn. He's come back to taunt me even more. I would like to talk to you if you have a moment. I let out a sigh and gently closed the book before walking over to the door. I opened it just a crack. What do you want? I didn't bother to hide the discomfort in my voice or the glare in my eye. It's not like he wasn't expecting anything different. Tyron was standing just outside my small room, an apologetic flicker lighting his dark eyes. The King of the West's general was so large in the small decks of the ship that he had to crouch a few inches so his head wouldn't brush the top of the ceiling. I raised a questioning eyebrow at him. I've come to apologize, my lady. I spoke out of place this morning and upset you. I'm sorry. I blinked up in surprise at the large Wolfborn as he stood hunched awkwardly in front of my door, a rather sheepish smile pulling at his handsome face. I crossed my arms over my chest and raised an eyebrow at him. He's been rude to me before this morning, but never before had he come to apologize. What made now any different? I know, but I've seemed to really upset you this time, and I am sorry for that. His gaze and soft smile seemed sincere enough, so I let my arms fall slowly back to my sides and ease my tense features. It's okay, I mumbled as his eyes flickered hopefully. His shoulders instantly sagged in relief as he let out a soft sigh. I felt a frown pull at my lips. I see you started reading already. He nodded towards the book, waiting patiently for me at the desk. My frown eased into a small smile. Yes, it's very fascinating. He muttered softly as his eyes flickered back out to the dimly lit hallway. Indeed, it is. Have a good night, Lady Emily. And with one last bow, he disappeared into the room next to mine. I stood silently in my door for a moment after, staring wide-eyed at the spot he was just in. What an odd man. I retreated back into my room and closed the door behind me. I had a lot more reading to do. My lady. Tyron bowed as he held his hand out for me at the base of the platform. I gave him a grateful smile and nodded as he helped me down from the boat's ramp and out onto the bustling street. Whew, I muttered already as I raised my hand to fan the heat away from my face. I had just barely set foot in the lower kingdom, and I was already becoming overheated. And it didn't help that Tyron's large, intimidating figure practically hovered over me the entire time. The crew was taking our luggage to the inn. Would you two like to look around for a while? Lennox asked Mayra and me with a huff as he jumped down from the ramp and flashed us a bright smile. Sure, that sounds like fun. No, I will have to scout the town before Lady Emily goes anywhere. Tyron's gruff voice instantly washed over mine like I hadn't spoken at all. I turned wide, bewildered eyes on the Wolfborn and gaped up at him. I can assure you, General, I have never had a problem in the lower kingdom before. That was before you were important. His golden eyes flashed and I took a small step back as he snarled. Wow, I seriously hoped not all wolves were as unpredictable as he was. I let out an aggravated sigh and rubbed my palm against my forehead as Lennox's eyes narrowed. I wouldn't let her or my sister wander off on their own if I thought they would be in any danger. I don't care what you think. My orders are to protect Lady Emily, and I will do that in every way I know possible. Tyron's voice wasn't a snarl or even angry, just firm. He found Lennox rather ridiculous, and he wasn't going to waver his stout loyalty to the king by disobeying his orders anytime soon. It's all right, Lennox, I said softly when I saw the furious red creep quickly onto his face.
I don't know what his problem is, and I'm sure he's being overly cautious, but he's just doing his job. I didn't miss how the general's eyes widened or the surprised look he shot me before it quickly disappeared behind that emotionless mask once again. I'm sure he was expecting me to fight him on this, but the last thing I needed was for him to ruin the little excitement over this trip that I had left, which wasn't a lot, granted, but still. That's not the point. He keeps demeaning my authority, and your authority? Tyron suddenly growled, his golden eyes flashing dangerously as he took a heated step towards my angry town leader. Lennox's eyes widened, but he didn't back down, even though the Wolfborn was twice the size of any normal man and him.
The only authority you have is what those half-brained underlings think you possess. You should be on your hands and knees thanking me for allowing you to speak at all. Enough, I suddenly snapped and placed a firm hand on the large general's chest as he bristled and took a threatening step beside me. His whole body froze, and his golden eyes shot down to my touch, but I refused to move away as I shot him and Lennox a dark look. We are supposed to be on a trip and enjoying ourselves. The last thing any of us needs is a winter filled with arguing, so please try to get along, or at least be civilized, I exclaimed and glared pointedly at Lennox as his dark eyes flickered angrily. Sure, Tyron had a problem with being, well, soulless, but if Lennox didn't egg him on like always, they would hardly ever talk. Mara's older brother clenched his jaw shut before his dark eyes glanced down and he gave a small nod. Fine, but keep him away from me for a while. He practically growled before turning on his heel and stalking down the busy street. I let out a small sigh as I turned to the large wolf simpering behind me with a raised eyebrow. My hand was still resting flat against his hard chest, but he didn't seem to notice anymore, or care, as his golden eyes glared daggers down at me. And you? Can I trust you to behave? His gaze flickered and his teeth clenched, but he gave me a silent nod before stepping away from my hand. I shook my head and turned to look at a wide-eyed, waiting Mara who had just been standing behind me the entire time. But Tyron's voice pulled me to a stop. If you wish to walk around for a while, I will follow you. My gaze widened, and I snapped my eyes to his emotionless face as he ran that heavy hand through his hair. His eyes never left the busy street or the crowd he towered over. I paused and licked my bottom lip as Mara suddenly clutched at my arm. I raised an eyebrow at her as she viciously nodded and stared up at the general with wide, adoring eyes. I let out a short breath of air. That would be perfect, thank you. The Wolfborn only nodded before resting his hands casually in his pants pocket. He's so handsome, she gushed not 5 minutes later as we walked around the bustling stands and the heavy crowd. Tyron was following closely behind us, but kept a few empty feet between. The street was too packed to give anyone much room, but the few who tried to squeeze between our little group earned a swift growl and a hard shove out of the way from our lovely guard. There was a blush staining her pale cheeks, and she kept glancing over her shoulder shyly every few seconds. I shook my head. Don't bother, Mara. I don't think he has a nice bone in his body, I muttered softly as we glanced through all the pretty necklaces hanging from a string on one of the stands. He's so handsome, she gushed not 5 minutes later as we walked around the bustling stands and the heavy crowd. Tyrant was following closely behind us, but kept a few empty feet between. The street was too packed to give anyone much room, but the few who tried to squeeze between our little group earned a swift growl and a hard shove out of the way from our lovely guard. There was a blush staining her pale cheeks, and she kept glancing over her shoulder shyly every few seconds. I shook my head. Don't bother, Mara. I don't think he has a nice bone in his body, I muttered softly as we glanced through all the pretty necklaces hanging from a string on one of the stands. He's sure that's not true, she argued before glancing over her shoulder once again. The large general was leaning heavily against the wall a few feet from us, his golden eyes hard as they constantly scanned the crowded street. Every once in a while, they would flicker over to Mara and me before scanning the crowd once again. He showed little interest other than following us around and keeping me safe. I didn't want Mayra to get her hopes up over some wolf that couldn't even hold a polite conversation. She was an underling after all, and the shifter besides the great wolf-borns. I feared he would be far ruder towards her than he was with me. And if that book Taryn had given me was anything to go by, the mates given to them by the heavens were one of the most important aspects of their culture. I doubted they were up for little, temporary, romantic flings, especially with those they didn't even consider residents of the mountain. "Are you ready, Lady Emily?" I jumped in surprise as Taryn's voice suddenly appeared in my ear, and I blinked up at him as he stood hovering over my small frame. I hadn't even felt him approach. Mayra's eyes widened, and she let out a small gasp as her gaze watched the large male looming over me. "Ready for what?" I stammered as his golden eyes flashed. For such a big man, he moved quietly. Too quietly for my liking. "To head to the inn?" "It's still early." It was hard to keep my voice from a mumble as I dropped my gaze back to the jewelry. He was just so intimidating. It honestly made my skin want to crawl. Mayra's hands clutched tightly onto my arm. "We've been out long enough. Tomorrow is another day." I licked my lips at his words. His tone wasn't harsh or angry or even really demanding. It was reasonable, like he didn't really want to start an argument. I let out a small sigh and blinked my eyes over at Mayra. "You wouldn't mind heading in for the night, would you? We can venture out early tomorrow." She was nodding her head before I even finished speaking, her eyes too focused on the giant general looming at my side. "Not at all. I'm getting kind of hungry anyway." She shot me a small smile before blinking bashfully up at Taryn. I wanted to tell her not to even bother. I didn't want her feelings to grow and then be torn apart when he shot hateful words at her. He wouldn't care either way. Taryn only grunted before gripping onto my elbow and steering me in the direction he wanted me to go. Mayra stumbled hurriedly after us. "You can slow down, it's not like we're in a hurry," I grumbled as he ushered me past the busybodies and turned towards a vacant alley. "How do you even know where we're staying?" I asked on the side when I realized he wasn't going to listen. "I can smell that child who calls himself a leader anywhere." He practically growled as he pulled me through the streets just outside the busy crowd. Mayra followed silently behind us. I frowned, but didn't bother commenting. I didn't need any more of those lovely talks between us for a while, or the rest of the day at least. The king assigned him to escort me through the lower kingdom, and although I didn't seem all that sure in what Eric really thought of me, he must have trusted Taryn. I would have to trust him. Although, honestly, who would possibly want to hurt me? No one even knew I was the king of the West's supposed mate. I had to shake my head of all thoughts revolving around him and try to focus on what was going on around me. I already didn't want to be there. I wanted to be on the mountain, sitting in my chair and daydreaming about what a life with the king would be like. I let out an internal groan and actually shook my head. Not thinking about him was going to be harder than I thought. "Ah!" I screeched when my foot suddenly slipped into an unseen hole in the stone walkway and my ankle twisted painfully. I stumbled right out of Tyron's soft grip and fell to the ground with a cry as my poor foot throbbed. The large general stopped his hurried steps and turned towards me with a raised eyebrow before he let out a dark chuckle. "Are you all right, my lady?" His voice was a mocking tease, one eye shot an angry glare at before turning back to my hurt foot. "I'm fine," I snapped at him as Mara dropped to my side and lifted the end of my dress gently. "You're such a klutz, Em," she teased softly, but a giggle skipped past her lips as she gazed down at my throbbing ankle. "Thanks for the help," I grumbled at her and shooed her away with my hand before looking down at my quickly swelling foot. Just perfect. "Are you all right?"
Tyron's voice was softer, more somber that time, as his large form slowly crouched down behind me. My teeth clenched. The arrogant general had just been laughing at me, like he even actually cared. "I already told you, I'm fine." I turned my head to shoot him another glare, but my words caught in my throat. Blue eyes. Blue eyes so bright they shone like clashing lightning as they gazed down at me in concern. I could only blink up at him like a gaping moron as that concerned gaze turned worried. "Emily, are you all right?" It was still Tyron's voice, but the soft, almost caring tone in it threw me for a loop, especially with Eric's eyes shining down at me. "West." My lips moved on their own as my hand reached slowly for his face, my fingers rubbing gently under the skin of his eyes. How was this happening? His blue eyes flashed, and a small smile pulled at the wolf's face as he gave me a soft chuckle. "I thought you weren't going to call me that," he teased gently, amusement dancing across those lightning eyes. I couldn't help the blush that rose to my cheeks, but like all other times I saw him, my eyes never wavered from his. "You don't want me calling you by the other name." My words came out slow, like I wasn't exactly sure what I was trying to say. My mind just could not get over what was happening. The king's eyes in Tyron's body, the king's almost sweet tone rolling off his general's vicious tongue. It was making my head spin. His small smile turned sad as Tyron's large hand reached up and played gently with a strand of my hair, just like the king had done before we left. His eyes finally flickered from mine and glanced down at my bruised ankle, his smile turning into a frown. "You are hurt," he murmured softly, and before I realized what he was doing, the general's large arms reached out and scooped me right off the ground. I let out a surprised squeak as he rose to his feet and cradled me gently to his chest.
How is this possible?" I stammered softly as he turned back around and began carrying me down the vacant street. A silent, bewildered Mara followed behind us once again. I tried to shoot her wide and rather terrified eyes an apologetic smile, but my gaze was already flickering back up to the king's gorgeous blues before I could. He gave me another small smile before Tyron's arms cradled me tighter to him. "You are hurt, little Emily. We will talk when I see you again." "When will that be?" I asked quickly as his blue eyes seemed to flicker. His smile fell and his jaw set in a hard clench as that gaze darkened. He was leaving. He was giving Tyron back his body, or whatever he had done to be there in the first place. I'm not sure." His voice was soft but distant as his eyes flashed gold before flickering back to blue. "It takes a lot of energy to do this, but I will check in on you soon." I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye as Tyron's body suddenly stalled and his large form lurched to a stop as his eyes flashed and turned that dark gold once again. My heart dropped in my chest. Bye. I was never going to get over how my chest ached painfully whenever he disappeared. It was so weird. My eyes shot up to Tyron as he let out a dark growl and shook his head, but didn't drop his arms from around me. "Tyron?" "Don't," he snarled and didn't spare me a glance as he started walking again, his hard shoulders stiff as he carried me angrily down the street. "But what was that?" I said, "Don't," he snapped and shot that dark glare at me. I flinched in his hold. "Well, okay then." I didn't say anything else as he stormed angrily through deserted streets and straight to the inn at the center of the city, where we were apparently staying. I felt bad for poor Mara. If it wasn't for his abnormally large form standing taller than almost everything, we would have lost her. "Oh God, Emily, what happened?" Lennox demanded the minute we walked into the tavern. He had been sitting at one of the middle wooden tables, surrounded by the few guards the elders hired each year we visited. I shot him a small smile, but didn't get a chance to answer before Tyron was carrying me angrily up the rickety wooden steps by the tavern's counter. "Mara can tell you." That was all I was able to say before we disappeared upstairs. "You know you don't have to be so rude all the time," I snapped when the large wolfborn suddenly shoved open the fourth door down and stomped in. He ignored me before literally tossing me like a rag doll onto the dingy little cot at the back of the room. He didn't say anything as he turned for the door again. "I didn't want you here any more than you did," I shouted after him, but he barely paused before slamming the door shut behind him. "Ugh." I let out a loud shout of annoyance as my heavy body plopped back against the cot. He was so mean. The king was definitely not as hostile and rude as he was. Maybe those cruel and vicious rumors were about that ignorant general instead.
I rubbed my hands down my face with a heavy sigh as the images of bright blue eyes flashed through my mind. The king of the West, Eric. He had taken over Tyron's body somehow, had carried me for as long as he seemed he could. He was here. For a moment, a brief moment, he was here. My heart wanted to soar at the memory. I glanced around the dark, tiny room and took in the run-down, shabby furniture that just sat plainly against the walls. The few bags of luggage I had packed sat against the foot of the bed, and I gave a small frown at the sight. How in the world did he know this was my room? I gasped and nearly shot from the bed when the door slammed open. Tyron stormed back in, a small goatskin bag clutched tightly in his hands. "What are you doing?" I stammered, and tried to edge away from him nervously, but the sharp pain in my ankle reminded me of how immobile I was at that moment. My eyes widened when he suddenly reached down and lifted my sore ankle into the air, his golden eyes hard as he glared holes down at my foot. "Wait!" I started to exclaim, but instantly froze when he pressed that bag gently to my swollen injury. The bag was cold, but it instantly soothed the throbbing pain in my ankle. I let out a relieved sigh and let my back rest slowly against the surprisingly soft mattress. "Thank you," I mumbled softly as a wave of sleep washed over me. The sun had set a few minutes before, and my mind had been going full throttle ever since I got off the ship. I needed sleep. "Go to sleep." Tyron's dark voice growled, and despite the harsh undertone, I found my eyelids falling heavily. I was lying awkwardly sideways on the bed, with my foot held slightly in the air as he alternated the cold pack around the swollen bone. My eyes had finally closed, and I just started to drift off to sleep when the cold of the bag disappeared. I wanted to pout and demand he place the bag back, but I was too tired to really care at the moment. And I was definitely too tired to pay much attention to the pair of large arms gently scooping under me and lifting me to the normal position on the bed. I let out a small groan. "Shh." The soft voice was enough to make my mind slowly ease off to sleep once again, but not before I felt him readjust my ankle and place the cold bag back on the throbbing pain. "Sleep well, Lady Emily."